Also unable to go, and tonight they take on a good Dallas Maverick team, another team with a winning record. However, much like that of the Miami Heat, they come in to chase not at 100% with their star player, Luka Doncic. With the quad injury, he's questionable for tonight's game, so is Kyrie Irving. And unlike that of the Miami Heat, that this is more of a one-dimensional team because they are so Luka Doncic dependent. And without him, it changes the entire complexion of that basketball team. But we thought the same without Jimmy Butler. I think Miami has a little bit more depth. But, Grant, let's just bring you in really quick. Just the state of where the Golden State Warriors are right now as they take on, once again, another unhealthy opponent in the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, we'll see about Luka Doncic. Obviously, I mean, one of the most fun basketball players to watch in the entire NBA, and from a pure entertainment standpoint, certainly hope that he plays tonight against the Golden State Warriors. But it would be a nice break for the Warriors if they don't have to take on Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. But for me, Dan, everything related to the Warriors right now is so much more about the Warriors than any opponent. Obviously, you need to go out there and you need to start stringing wins together. You are back under 500 now after you had that 5-game win streak leading up to Christmas to get one game over 500. You lose to Denver on Monday, and then you lose again on Thursday, as you mentioned, to the Miami Heat, a Miami Heat team that's playing without a number of really important players. And now you're back under 500, and all of these questions that are swirling around the Warriors, a lot of them can be answered and can make things easier if you just go out there and win games, and Luka Doncic not playing tonight certainly might help the Warriors do that. But for me, Dan, the Warriors just have so many problems, themselves, that I'm not even really worried about what other teams are doing and who might be playing and who might be missing. The Warriors have to just figure their stuff out first, and there's a lot of things to figure out. You look now a little more than a month away is the NBA trading deadline. I know we spent a lot of time this week, you've been on all week, talking about names and potential trades and who the Warriors might be willing to move on from. For me, Dan, as much as this is about the Warriors trying to string wins together, getting back into a playoff spot, proving themselves that they're good enough to legitimately compete this season, as much as it is about that, it's also about individual players over the next 4 weeks going out there and playing and determining their Warriors' future. I think almost everything is on the table for the Golden State Warriors, and if things break one way for certain individuals over the next 4 weeks, I mean, that could signal the end of their time in Golden State. I really think the Warriors are open to nearly all options right now. And again, as much as the team has questions, I think there's so many questions for individual players on the roster right now. And, it begins, of course, with the next game, which is Dallas tonight. It's just an opportunity for individuals to prove to Steve Kerr and to Mike Dunleavy and to the entire Warriors leadership team that they are, a future, part of this team's future. Because I think right now there's questions about nearly everybody's future on this team.
The Dallas Mavericks, as you alluded to, coming in tonight, if they don't have Luka Doncic, who is about as much of a, you talk about Steph being clearly the go-to in a one-dimensional team of the Golden State Warriors, you nullify Steph and pretty much, you can take care of the Golden State Warriors. Well, I think even more so when you assess the Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic leading the team in scoring at over 33 a game, 33.7, leads the team in reboundings at just over 8, leads the team in assists at 9.2 a game, leads the team in steals. So you remove him and Kyrie Irving not available today, you can't lose to Tim Hardaway Jr., Derek Jones, Dante Exum, Grant Williams, Derek Lively. Like tonight, if you don't have Luka Doncic, there are no more excuses as the Dallas Mavericks, as we talked about, taking on the Warriors tonight. But we'll find out with Luka. Go ahead.
I mean, on Thursday, they lost to Jamal Cain in the Miami Heat, Dan.
Well, Tyler Hero was still good to go. He had a big ball game, and Bam Adebayo still legit. They had, they're still the Miami. We talked about this the other day.
It's kind of Heat culture.
It is Heat culture, and they play basketball just sort of. There's everybody else, and then there's the Miami Heat, and there's Spo and in their zone, and Kerr mentioned this afterwards that he got out-coached and they got outplayed. There still is depth on that basketball team, but tonight, the Dallas Mavericks, unlike that of the Miami Heat, don't have that sort of depth and don't have that same sort of culture. So no excuses tonight. It's interesting. Every time we do this show, it's sort of a benchmark. It's almost sort of a barometer. Last week, we were talking about, hey, Dan, we're doing a show, and since the last time we spoke, they haven't lost. They were undefeated. Boom, Christmas hits. You lose to Denver, which is a game I think that you could swallow because I still think Denver is the team to beat.
And they were competitive in that game all the way to the end.
Very much. And that thing was hanging in the balance. And Steve Kerr talked about the 18 free throws going to, Nikola Jokic. There were some things in that game that if they shake out differently, the Warriors certainly have a shot to win it. But you had to feel good because the Warriors are playing the best team in the NBA without Draymond Green, and they hung with them. They were right there on the road in Denver. And then there's no explaining away what the hell happened against the Miami Heat.
No.
And that's where we're at. Again, sub 500. And you're right. I think that all of these players, now you got to bring GP2 into the mix. If you're Steve Kerr, how do you do the math? How do you juggle and appease all of these guys when you're going essentially 13 deep right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you do it. Someone's going to be the odd man out, which is why when you try to do the math, as Steve Kerr probably does as he's trying to fall asleep every night, you realize you just have too many players that you think you want to play, but also aren't really separating themselves and aren't necessarily demanding 25, 30 minutes a night. Like the Warriors have depth, right? Like this is as deep of a Warrior team as maybe there's ever been in the Steve Kerr era, but it's also as inconsistent. Like the depth isn't consistent. Warriors' depth in the past had been consistent. You had Sean Livingston. You knew what you were going to get from Sean Livingston every single night. Early in the Steve Kerr era, you had Leandro Barbosa. You knew what you were going to get from him. David West, Maurice Spates. Like these aren't perfect players, and they're not going to be the driving force behind a championship, Dan, but those were all players who you could rely on night in and night out. Maurice Spates was going to hit a couple of jumpers, hit a three, get the crowd going. You also knew he was going to play terrible defense. It just was what you got with him. Sean Livingston was going to hit that sweet little fadeaway from the short corner, 15 feet away. He was automatic in the mid-range. Leandro Barbosa was going to cut and slash and get to the rim and run out in transition, and he was going to get you 8 points over, 14 minutes on a given night. But with the Warriors and their depth now, well, I will argue that they are as deep as they've ever been. Steve Kerr has never really played 10, 11, 12 players regularly. No one is really proving to the Warriors coaching staff, Steve Kerr and everyone else, and even Mike Dunleavy, that they deserve more than just a stint here or there. Like if Moses Moody was coming in and was shooting the absolute cover off of the ball, he would be getting more minutes. But guess what, Dan? He's shooting 25% from downtown this month. Like, he has struggled to shoot the ball. As a result, he's getting fewer minutes. And even if you just look at what happened against Miami, I mean, Klay Thompson only played 25 minutes. Jonathan Kuminga played 24. Brandon Pajemski played 28. Like, that's not that many minutes. The Warriors kind of waved the white flag at the end, and still you only get 13 Moses Moody minutes. So where are those minutes coming from? The Warriors just simply have too many bodies, and we're getting to a point where it feels like, Dan, the most natural solution, even if the Warriors aren't comfortable giving up on somebody, the most natural solution to make this roster fit and flow better and to make Steve Kerr's life a little bit easier, it's to make a trade. Ship out 3 guys and get one better guy back in return. Now, we've been throwing out names all week here on 95.7 The Game. The most popular ones are Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, both on the Toronto Raptors. There are others like Lauri Markkanen on the Utah Jazz. I don't know if the Raptors would even consider making a trade with the Golden State Warriors, but it seems like the best path forward for Golden State, Dan, it is kind of fixing the roster crunch that they have by moving off of 2 or 3 and only getting 1 in return. It would make things so much clearer for this team going forward.
And whoever it is that they get in return has to establish themselves as a go-to scorer. Not a hit or miss, but somebody who's established, who's going to give you that 18 to 20 points a game. And it's the lack of consistency on this Golden State Warrior team. Once you get past Steph Curry, and we've talked about this throughout, who is it that you can rely on a night-to-night basis that is going to offset the scoring from Steph Curry? Klay Thompson, statistically, he's up to 17 points a game, but again, I wouldn't call him consistent up to this point. He had the slow start. He disappears at times. And then, who knows, tonight he may go off for, 28 and 30 again. You have no idea with Klay Thompson. They need to establish a number 2 scorer on this basketball team. And to your point, I agree. It's sort of ironic when you think about the issues that plagued this team just a short year ago where they had no depth. And now it's problematic. As ridiculous as that might sound, if I was to tell you a year ago that, hey, let's just fast forward, look into your crystal ball, and the Golden State Warriors' biggest problem this year, as we talked to you in late December going into January, is that they have too many players on that bench. And now it's just you can't appease everybody. And you're either going to piss off Moody, Kuminga.
You're already pissing off Kuminga.
You're already pissing off Kuminga. And so it's time. You're right. It's time for somebody to go, I think. It's reached that point. And now it's almost like a tryout because I don't think trades typically happen this time of the year.
No, you need the deadline to kind of encourage this stuff. And the deadline's February 8th.
So you're looking about another good, a month and a half of the Golden State Warriors trying to find a rotation, trying to find out who that basketball player or players that are expendable and what is it that they bring in return. I think a lot of this we need a level of patience because I think Draymond Green needs to come back into the fold, whatever his role is. If he's coming off the bench, if he's in that starting rotation, I think it's exciting to see how he plays with Trayce Jackson-Davis. But we have to see, with him being the centerpiece again, if that's the focus of the Warriors going forward, how does then everything work from that point going forward? So a lot of this is going to take some patience. Now, I know we like to overreact after a loss, get rid of this guy, trade this guy, fire Steve Kerr. I heard that yesterday. I think
I'm seeing it on the YouTube chat right now as well.
I think we're getting the trees a little bit here. And also to your point, I would say that Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis, they seem to be getting meaningful minutes. Podziemski seems to be getting serious run, and I don't think there's any sort of underutilization of the rookie. I feel they were slow to recognizing what it is that he could do, but right now I feel as though you're getting the most out of the young man that you could expect for somebody that we have to keep in mind, despite the old soul, is still in his first year in the NBA. And I think the same could be said about Trayce Jackson-Davis. But once you get past those two, then it becomes pretty much, I have no idea what you're getting from Moody, what are you getting from Kuminga, and the like on a nightly basis.
Well, if I were to ask you how many Golden State Warriors have set in stone, clearly identified roles every single night, obviously it's Stephen Curry. Maybe against better judgment, maybe against what his play suggests, although he has been much better the last 3 weeks now. Klay Thompson does have a set role. It's a little more rocky than it has been in the past. But you have Steph, you have Klay, and then you have the two rookies, Brandon Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis. Those guys have set roles. Now, maybe you want a larger role from Trayce Jackson-Davis, but those guys are playing every single night, and they know exactly what they're going to get, how many minutes they're going to get every single night. I think you even throw Draymond Green into that conversation when he does return, because despite all of his on-court transgressions and everything that he's done that has hurt this team, he's still a very good basketball when he's on the floor, and the Warriors are a better team with him. But beyond those guys, Dan, to your point, what other players go into any single game, say tonight, and know exactly how many minutes they're going to play? They feel confident with the opportunity that they're going to get. They know what their role is. They know what their responsibility is. They know what they're asked to do. Jonathan Kuminga is starting, but go back to Christmas in Denver. He didn't close. Andrew Wiggins closed because Kuminga didn't have his best game. Wiggins was playing better. He made shots for the first time in a while, so he closed. And then you fast forward to Thursday night against Miami, where Steph didn't even close. Crazily enough, the Warriors went to something entirely different because their normal starting five, normal closing lineup wasn't working. Beyond Steph and Klay to a certain degree, and then the two rookies. Those are the only four players on the Warriors right now that have a set-in-stone role and that know that they're going to be asked to do, X, Y, and Z every single night. For everyone else, it's kind of as the wind blows, and you don't really know what you're going to get, and you don't really know what you're going to be asked to do on any given night.
I would say Dario Saric and Chris Paul have set
you're
minutes.
Right.
But you're right. Beyond that, who knows? Especially when you get the back end of that rotation. And while, there are guys that you want to get in there because they have the potential to help your basketball team, you just have no idea. Jonathan Kuminga is somebody that we get into every week, and we certainly will throughout the show today as we welcome you in once again to Warriors This Week. It's Mark Grant against Dan Avone. But I think Andrew Wiggins, I've been an apologist. I've defended this guy. I thought the slow start maybe was attributed to the fact that he did not have a good offseason health-wise, that maybe he ended last year with that sort of, the cartilage issue, and he had bad ribs, and, that's a lengthy injury, and maybe he was just slow to returning and getting his sea legs, if you will. But now we're getting a little too deep into the campaign, and it's hard to explain away what the hell's going on with this guy. Now, he's always been sort of an introvert throughout his NBA career, even in his stint with the Golden State Warriors, where even when it's going well for him, he had a tendency to disappear, and he lacked emotion at times, and then he'd bust out and suddenly be this guy that I remember that dunk on Karl Anthony Towns a year ago.
Man. The dunk on Luka in the playoff run?
Amazing. And then there's times where, he's just not that guy emotionally. So he's always been sort of a difficult guy to figure out. But this is we've reached new depths as far as his inability to score the basketball with any level of consistency. And I think that this late into the season, this is more of a surprise than anything else. And I think that Steve Kerr, as well as management, well, Jonathan Kuminga, you knew there were some warts. While you would have loved to seen him, in his third year break out, but still you knew that this was more of a project because of the fact that he was just so wild at times, good at other times, but also taking that step back like he did the other night with the 6 turnovers. I think Steve Kerr felt as though, okay, maybe I can tolerate a bit of a slow start with Andrew Wiggins. But now as we get into January, and he's still doing the same things he did back in late October, November, where he can't score the basketball in deep. He's not the same guy taking people off the dribble. The three-point shooting isn't there. And with that, his defense has slipped. That this is something they didn't factor on. And this really becomes problematic. And so I think this comes down to, when we get into the trade talk, that one of two guys have got to go. And it's going to be Andrew Wiggins and Jonathan Kuminga. Only because if you want something in return, you got to give up something. And all this talk of trying to hide, trying to hide your assets by here's Moody and here's Chris Paul and here's some draft picks. Come on, GMs know what's up. You've got to give something to get something. And in the case of the Golden State Warriors, their assets are Jonathan Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins. And right now, I don't even know what Andrew Wiggins can bring you in return. But Andrew Wiggins, to me, this late into the season, the fact that he's continuing to be so underwhelming, not only is puzzling, but really, really a problem for the Warriors going forward. Yeah, it really is. And speaking of trade talk, Dan, we have breaking news from the NBA, and it involves the Toronto Raptors.
95.7 The Game, breaking news.
This comes courtesy of Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. The Toronto Raptors are finalizing a trade to send OG Anunoby to the New York Knicks for a package including RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations. So OG Anunoby, a guy who's been rumored in trade talks for years now, including here for the Golden State Warriors, is off the board. He is now a New York Knick. I'm surprised this trade is happening right now, Dan. So am I. Now that's interesting because immediately the knee-jerk reaction tells me, are they blowing it up out in Toronto? Now, if Anunoby is going to go, then what's to say that you're not going to move off him, your best player, Pascal Siakam? And if that's the case, then the Golden State Warriors certainly should be in that conversation. Give me again what it is that the New York Knicks gave up. RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations. Don't know exactly what the draft considerations are yet. So as far as trade capital, do the Warriors have something comparable to an RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, a good basketball player, both young players? RJ Barrett has been good over the last couple of years after his slow start coming out of Duke. Interesting. So we're seeing trades just as we got through talking about. Typically, you don't see anything this time of the year, and suddenly Toronto's pulling the trigger on a guy that, you're right, had been mentioned on numerous occasions coming to the Golden State Warriors.
So now take him off the board. And if there's activity at this juncture, I would have to think that, because you know how this works with GMs, right? It is it's a small fraternity. And I would have to think that the Golden State Warriors and Dunleavy was on the phone and had conversations. If they're shopping Anunoby, it wasn't the New York Knicks that were the only ones that were on the phone to Toronto. The Golden State Warriors had to have been on those calls. And I don't know what it is that they packaged. I don't know what it is that they offered. And, of course, I'm getting ahead of myself because this is all speculation. But you know that if that was the case, you would have to think that the Golden State Warriors were in on those conversations. And did they not have enough trade capital to lure Anunoby, one of the guys that they had targeted, to come to the Golden State Warriors? This is fascinating. Again, he's a guy that fills all those needs.
He would be perfect on this Warriors team. Oh, my God.
And so the Warriors, knowing their fate, what is it that they offered? And it's interesting. If it wasn't enough to get Anunoby, it sure as hell ain't going to be enough to get one Pascal Siakam.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to draw a comparison between what the Knicks offered to get it done and what the Warriors would be offered to get it, what they could offer to potentially get it done, or what they might have offered to Toronto. Again, so it's RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations from the Knicks to Toronto for OG Anunoby. Jonathan Kuminga would have to be involved in the trade, you would feel like. That would be maybe more so the Emmanuel Quickley lane, because Quickley is a little bit younger and he's a little bit more unproven, although RJ Barrett hasn't quite lived up to his draft potential yet. He's a solid player, and you feel like you can rely on him to give you, like 15 points a night. You'd also have to include, I don't know, then that's where you get kind of to the Warriors' sticking point, where they don't have a ton of young assets that they can move off of, unless you're willing to trade both Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga, plus draft consideration. But then, of course, the money doesn't quite match. So the Warriors would have to include Andrew Wiggins or Chris Paul or Klay Thompson in order to get something like that to work. So if you're looking at what made the Toronto Raptors say yes, Dan, in my mind, unless the Warriors just absolutely blow them out of the water by offering every single piece of young capital that they have, I don't see a way that the Warriors could weasel their way into, making a deal for Anunoby work. It just seemed like there were other teams, the Knicks included, maybe there were even others out there who were willing to part with more valuable young assets, which is clearly what Toronto is prioritizing here.
Yeah, I would think the two guys that are off, have to be off the table as far as trade considerations, would be the two rookies this year. Now, I don't know that as fact.
And it's hard to even include them in a deal because they're making so little anyway.
But, Kuminga isn't, he's not as big of a trade bait as maybe we assume at this point. And Wiggins, again, if I'm Toronto, and Wiggins is still 29 years of age, now he's making what, I want to say 24 this year, 25.
I'll double check. He signed for what felt like a discount at the time, if you remember.
So, his numbers make sense. You throw Chris Paul in there, but that's, is that enough to turn their head? And the Warriors just may not, as much as you want to make a deal, the Warriors may not have enough trade capital to lure in the sort of player that they covet.
Wiggins is making just over $24 million this year.
Okay, so Wiggins would make sense. But again, it's just a matter of, why would anyone want Andrew Wiggins after what it is that you've seen over the last year and a half? I guess is the big question. And if he's a trade piece, along with Jonathan Kuminga, who continues to have, he has, as they like to say, some warts on him, a good performance, and then again, doing what it is that he did the other night with the minus 26 and the 6 turnovers. That's fascinating stuff because, again, I would think that Anunoby had to have been in the conversation with the Golden State Warriors. Otherwise, Dunleavy's not doing his job. And if the news that you just broke wasn't the New York Knicks, and if it wasn't the Golden State Warriors, and it's the New York Knicks, well then, how come the Golden State Warriors fell short, I guess, is the question this morning.
Just because they don't have the right kind of assets.
And so what is it? If they don't have the assets for Anunoby, you certainly don't have the assets for Pascal Siakam. So what are the...
You think Siakam's worth more than Anunoby?
Yeah, I do.
They're both solid players.
They're both solid.
Honestly, I think Anunoby might fit the Warriors a little bit better. But if you're talking about league-wide, who's valued more, maybe Siakam. I could see it.
Remove Toronto from the equation. I took calls all week about Lauri Markkanen. Are you kidding me? There's no way.
No. He would be great on this team as well, but no, I don't see that happening either.
So again, then how much, if it's not the top tier players, then once you start moving down that ladder and you get into second tier players, then does it make sense to even pull the trigger? If Memphis wants to suddenly clean house, does Desmond Bane coming over here, does that make sense? It's not the sort of impact. Then you're getting to the point, well, really, once we get past the top tier Pascal Siakams and the Markkanens of the world, maybe you're just better off hanging on to what it is that you have.
Well, yeah, that's a question. It's a discussion we can get into on the other side. The Warriors are considering, and I think this is what the next handful of weeks is also going to determine, in addition to individuals' futures like Andrew Wiggins and Jonathan Kuminga. I don't think those two both survive the trade deadline in Golden State. That's something that the Warriors are considering. But what the Warriors are also considering is, in the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, Dan, do the Warriors prove that they're good enough to even warrant you trying to chase this a little bit? Or are they just a lost cause and you'd rather hold on to your young assets and plan for the future? But the other half of that is, have your young assets done enough to prove that, they're a legitimate core that can compete for championships moving forward? I don't know what the answer is to either of those, and it's something that the Warriors have to consider, so we can get into that a little bit more on the other side as well.
All right, we see you on the phone line. Hang in there. We got to get to a quick break. We'll open up the lines. We'll take your calls. It's a good point. Should you start the rebuild now? I'm sure Steph has something to say about that. Or is this a team, do you think, that actually can make a run of the playoffs? It's Warriors This Week with Mark Graney and Dan Avone, and we continue after this.
Guys, are you tired of being tired? Frustrated because it seems impossible to lose belly fat? If you're looking for a solution,
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Per ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, the New York Knicks are finalizing a deal with the Toronto Raptors, one that would send OG Anunoby to Manhattan in exchange for R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations. Shams Charania of The Athletic further reveals that the draft choice will be a second-round pick. Many have clamored for the Knicks at 17 and 14 to make a trade in the wake of Mitchell Robinson's injury, and Anunoby fits the bill defensively. So there you go. One of the players that was mentioned potentially coming to the Golden State Warriors now off the board because he's going to the New York Knicks. Welcome once again to Warriors This Week. Alongside Mark Grandy, it's Dan Devone. Anytime you hang on through the break, we get to your calls. They're backing up. Line one, Dave is in Pleasanton, and Dave wants to talk about Draymond Green, Wiggins, and others. What's up, Dave?
Hey, what's going on, fellas? You guys might have to bottle me up because I'm sitting here thinking about what the Warriors can do, and I've got so many issues. One is we used to need Draymond's mentality, his enforcership, but he's making positive for this team. Whatever we want to look at as far as Draymond goes, he ruined last season. He was a big part of it, and he's not doing anything to help this team this season. When it comes to Wiggins, he's on the bench for a reason. He's not going to get out of this focus problem, so he's not going to benefit our team either. The only two things that we need to worry about right now are the youngsters and Stephen Curry. That is it. When it comes to Kerr, there's so many triggers he could have pulled as a head coach, but because he doesn't have the actual experience of coming up through the ranks and making all these decisions, I don't think he has the capability of doing it. And when Curry's gone, I don't think he has the capability of coaching youngsters and building them up. He basically Phil Jackson this ship. And that's all I got. It's time for Kerr to go. It's time for Wiggins to go. And it's time for Draymond to go. That's all I got.
Dave, it's a legitimate point. I mean, Steve Kerr, he inherited pretty much a full house. When you think about what was already in place when he took over for Mark Jackson, it was pretty much plug and play. And to think that he was on his way to the New York Knicks, how different would that career look? The Knicks 8-9 years ago. How many coaches have they been through since then? Guaranteed Steve Kerr would have been gone and bounced after, 18 months. But here he is, and you're right. He has inherited a winner. But to his credit, there is a respect factor. There's a lot of things that he's done as far as implementing an offense and just getting the most out of his team and just being that guy.
Well, they also really weren't a winner before he got there. I mean, they made the playoffs 2 straight years, but they won one playoff series before Steve Kerr got here.
But you could see that the youth maturing, that it was just a matter of time.
True, but the second that he stepped in, they were the one seed in the West and won it all. And he obviously had a big impact.
The caller also talked about, Dave in Pleasanton also talked about Draymond Green's got to go. I think Draymond before, because look, we all recognize what it is that he's done this year, and we go back to last year and the punch with Jordan Poole, but I think he's got to come back and just got to find out where he's at. You really do. You have to find out where he's at mentally, and you also find out physically how he's fitting in with these youngsters. Now, if it doesn't work, and say he has another dust up, and he loses it again, he blows another gasket, and he hauls off on somebody, well, then you can reassess and say, yeah, okay, it's time to move off on this guy. But at that juncture, who's going to trade for him? But I think he needs to come back, and you just have to see how all of this works with really the guy who, along with Steph Curry, is the centerpiece. Because the offense goes through him, and defensively, he's sort of your player coach. And I felt his absence last night the other night in the loss to Miami was really, really apparent.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the caller, I think Dave in Pleasanton, talking about, they don't need Draymond's enforcer stuff anymore. They don't need that. Okay, maybe they don't need the enforcer stuff from Draymond Green. I mean, if he keeps doing that, he's not going to be suspended indefinitely anymore. He's going to get suspended for the rest of the season. But what the Warriors do need, and I think, as you're mentioning, Thursday was the perfect example of this, they need his energy. They need his grittiness. They need just his will. I mean, do you think if Draymond is on the floor on Thursday, the Warriors look as flat and lifeless and lethargic as they did? I mean, it was up and down the roster. The Warriors were just lazy. You can hate Draymond all you want for some of the things and his decisions on the court. Yes, it might have cost the Warriors a championship in 2016. He's been suspended and missed more games this season than he's played. Yeah, I get it. Like, it's not good, and something needs to change for Draymond Green. But it is so apparent still that he is the heartbeat of the team, and without him, this team just feels like they have a breakable will. Like, you can just break them down. Things don't go well for the Warriors without Draymond Green. It almost feels like they're going to give in. But with Draymond Green, he just simply, at the very least, does not let that happen without a fight. And if Draymond Green was on the floor against the Miami Heat, I guarantee you, Jamal Cain wouldn't have scored 18 points and had a career high. Draymond doesn't let that kind of stuff happen. He would have had an impact on that game on Thursday, and it's another reason why the Warriors are in this situation where you just don't really know what they're going to decide, because on one hand, Draymond Green has made mistake after mistake after mistake, and every time he's cost his team dearly. But he's still so important to the team. So you can ultimately decide that you're done with Draymond Green and you want him out and you don't want to see him play another game for the Warriors. That's a fine decision. But all I would say, Dan, is when you're making that decision, just make sure that you're considering the fact that the Warriors still need this guy. And if you're saying it's time to move on from him, you are giving up on this era of Warriors basketball, because they do not win without Draymond Green.
I think it's easy to say now with his suspension. It's easy to sort of, jump to that, and I get it, right? It's not an overreaction. We've seen this repeatedly, but I think it's easy to say get him out of town, but I think he needs to come back, and you have to see what sort of basketball player he is. You have to see what sort of person he is, but also how he fits in with these younger players. I put this to you because this is interesting. You talked about how important he is and how, maybe Cain doesn't go off for 18 points. But part of what Draymond does is maybe he goes up to Cain and commits a hard foul, letting him know, my man, that ain't happening on my watch. But is that part of Draymond Green's game? Has that been removed after what it is that we've seen? Is he at that point where he's like, I can no longer be that sort of player? And are the referees overly sensitive to Draymond Green being a guy that's, clearly has the reputation of not only being physical, and that's putting it gentle, but a guy that has the tendency to step over that line? How does this alter his game as far as being that physical player and sort of balancing that edge and not crossing the line?
I think we just have to wait and see how it's going to impact it. Is Draymond Green really a changed man? If he is, then maybe you see less of that, or maybe the future of Draymond Green.
Well, that's my point. If you see less of that, do you compromise the Draymond Green that you were just referring to?
Yeah, maybe. So you just have to see what kind of player he is when he comes back. I mean, it's something that Steve Kerr has answered like thousands of times now. Would we like Draymond Green to, commit fewer terrible fouls and argue with the refs less and get fewer technical fouls and not get suspended or rejected ever? Yes. But do we want that at the expense of Draymond Green, the player? No, because Draymond Green is still so important and is still so intrinsic to the Warriors' success. So it's a balancing act. If Draymond Green changes, maybe he's a lesser player. If Draymond Green doesn't change, maybe he's still the quality player that he has been his entire career, but maybe he risks another long-term suspension, and likely, if there is another suspension, it'll be for, the remainder of the season whenever it happens, even if it happens early next season. Like, that's just the reality that the NBA is telling Draymond Green. And I'm seeing, a lot of people on the text line, the 510, you must not have been watching the Warriors this year. Every time they play, Draymond is not that player anymore. I flatly disagree. Draymond Green is still that player. Is he as good as he was in 2016? No, of course not. Neither is Klay. Maybe Steph Curry is still that player, but Steph Curry is one of the greatest players that have ever played the game of basketball. He's just different. There's like no player in the NBA who is as good or better now than they were in 2016, 2017, especially guys of Draymond's age. It's just not how it works. I mean, I'd ask you, Dan, of players that have played and been on the court, who has been the Warriors' second best player this season?
Draymond.
For me, yeah, I agree. It's Draymond. Now, he hasn't been available a lot, and he has only himself to blame for that. But when he's been on the court, he's been the Warriors' second best player, and as a result, they win more with him than they do without him. He's still important, so I flatly disagree with the 510 there. I'm seeing a lot of comments as well on the YouTube chat. Shout out to my family. My family disagrees with me about Draymond Green. That's fine. We can disagree, but Draymond Green is still so incredibly important to this team, and it's why I think trading Draymond Green is off the table. That's one thing that the Warriors are not even considering, because they know if they have any chance to win with this era of Warriors basketball, it will include Draymond Green. There's no doubt in my mind. Not saying I think it's going to happen, but if it does, it will be because Draymond Green figures this out, becomes available moving forward, and doesn't get suspended again. He is still a quality basketball player. It's why they signed him to a 4-year deal just like months ago. They made that decision months ago, just a handful of months ago. He's still a really good basketball player, and they are not moving on from him unless another suspension happens, and then you got to reconsider everything moving forward.
I think the last 2 years has been the best we've seen of Draymond over the last, maybe even going back to the championship year. Let's not forget, he was benched in that fourth quarter in the finals against the Celtics. But last year was obviously a contract year, so you knew you were going to get your best Draymond. And then he's followed it up again this year. He's physically in shape. Offensively, he's giving you something that you hadn't seen in years past. And he's still, well, he's a half step slower, and to your point, everybody else is. But you're right. He's still an impactful player. But it's one of those that it's a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So I don't blame fans. I get it, man. The last time you saw this guy, he was acting like a bozo. I get it. But I think when he comes back, you have to see how all of this shakes out. How does he work with this youth? How does he unlock Trayce Jackson-Davis, who doesn't necessarily really need to be unlocked because he's been so good, but you put him in that dunker spot with Draymond and Podziemski. Now there's an emphasis on defense. You got somebody who can rim protect in TJD. That wasn't there when Draymond Green was last with the team just a short month ago. The emergence of TJD has really sort of changed the overall personality of this team. Let's see how it works with, as you said, their second best player. Is that potentially, I think that Mike Dunleavy Jr. had to have been on the phone with the Toronto Raptors. But I could be wrong because all of this is conjecture and I have no idea, man. I'm just a dude talking to a live mic and I have opinions like everybody else. But is there a chance that maybe he said, you know what, it's jumping the gun because of what it is that we just laid out? Like, I'm not trading anybody until I see Draymond Green come back and see how it is that he immerses and works with this new look team, and the new look being Podziemski in the starting lineup, Kuminga in the starting lineup, and now I insert Draymond somewhere in there, and maybe by the time he comes back, Trayce Jackson-Davis, because I think that this is imminent, replaces Kevon Looney at the 5 spot. It's sort of a new look when you think about the starting lineup they rolled out on opening night. So how does Draymond play with that? Is that going to be a completely different look? And it'd be a little bit premature if I was to trade some of those key pieces before Draymond comes back. And maybe I didn't pick up the phone and maybe I wasn't in on OG Anunoby because of that very fact.
Yeah, it's kind of the risk you run. And to your point about Kevon Looney, he's questionable tonight with an illness. So you might get Trayce Jackson-Davis in the starting lineup. And I agree with you in terms of Looney. I think moving forward, specifically when Draymond Green does return, I don't think Looney's in the starting lineup anymore. I think the Warriors either run with Trayce Jackson-Davis at the 5 and Draymond at the 4, or they go small and Draymond at the 5 and they keep Kuminga at the 4. I think that's on the table. I think the days of Kevon Looney as a starter are numbered for the Golden State Warriors. But to your point about the Warriors trying to figure out what they need to do or not do before the trade deadline, I mean, there's a reality where, say they made this trade for OG Anunoby or for Pascal Siakam now or anytime before Draymond returns. And then Draymond returns and the team just can't quite figure it out. They crash and burn. Either they miss the playoffs or they just get into the play-in and they don't even make a single round of the playoffs. They lose in the play-in. And they traded away Kuminga or Moody and Wiggins and picks for Pascal Siakam or whatever the trade was. Then you're in a situation, if you're the Golden State Warriors, where not only did you pull the trigger and it not work, you didn't get literally anything out of it, but you also hurt yourself moving forward in the future. So I think for the Warriors, and the problem that they're sitting on right now, specifically that Mike Dunleavy is sitting on, is what you laid out, Dan. Would they like to go out and acquire OG Anunoby? Yes, of course. But I don't think the Warriors have confidence that the team right now is good enough to warrant that kind of move. So as a result, they need to kind of wait and continue to evaluate and figure it out. If the Warriors continue to struggle and they get to the trade deadline, and I don't know exactly how many games they have left before the trade deadline, but say they're something like, 22 and 25. Is that good enough to warrant a move? And if Draymond Green is back for 5 games before the trade deadline and the Warriors go 2-3 in that set of 5 games, no, that's not good enough. The Warriors aren't going to be able to turn it around like that, at least in my mind, if you just add in a Pascal Siakam. So the Warriors are in a situation where it's not just can they make a move? Do they have the pieces to even make a move? They also have to consider, Dan, is the team even good enough in the first place that one move is enough to catapult them into legit contender status? Because they haven't really shown anything to me on a consistent basis that would say that they are. But the big elephant in the room is, as you said, how does Draymond Green play when he comes back? Maybe that turns things around and the team looks different moving forward, and that encourages them to make a move. But I don't think they're necessarily in a rush to do that because they still have so many other internal questions to sort through.
I think that's the key, is not being in a rush, because we are still very early. We're 31 games into the season. Okay, so you're 15-16. Now that's it's very similar to that of a year ago. So you're not playing well by Warriors standard, but you're still 4 games out of the 4 seed. It's still one big winning streak from being right back, thrusted into the top tier of the Western Conference? Or is that giving a sense of false hope? Because I think a lot of people, including the Warriors, feel as though, it's coming, that we're going to figure this out. There's no way we're going to be a sub-500 basketball team. But I mentioned this yesterday. When you look at it, the Rockets, the Suns, the Lakers, and the Pelicans, and the Mavericks are all the teams in front of you. And you have to make at this juncture, I don't know that you can make a convincing argument that you're better than any of those teams. And looking into the future, I don't know what would change for you to feel as though that you can leapfrog any of those teams, the Lakers, the Pelicans, the Mavericks, and including the Houston Rockets. So there's a lot of wait and see. And I don't know that the future has ever been hanging in the balance or been in such doubt in terms of what it is that the Warriors are doing and where it is that they're headed, because there are so many moving pieces on this team, whether it's the bench that we've alluded to, the Draymond Green suspension, the absence of Andrew Wiggins. Do you make a trade? Do you not make a trade? Then I think at the end of the day, you just got to let this thing breathe. All right? You can't jump the gun because you're 1 game under 500, because you're still, as I mentioned, still very much in it. But it could go south. On the same token, you're only 2 games in front of the Utah Jazz, believe it or not. And at that 11 seed, as bad as it's been, it can get worse. So the Golden State Warriors just have to I know it's the last thing anybody wants to hear. I know you want to make a trade yesterday, but you just have to wait for Draymond to come back. And I think you have to let all of this just play out. And you have a little time here. Thankfully, this is early on in the season, and there's still an opportunity for you to catch fire and get back into that top tier of the Western Conference. But will it happen? No one knows at this juncture. But I do know that I think the best course of action right now is to wait for Draymond to come back and just to see the progress of these youngsters. And also Jonathan Kuminga. So many people were in on Jonathan Kuminga, but yet glossing over what it is that he did the other night. I heard so many people that talk about him not getting playing time and defending, Jonathan Kuminga in his conversation with Marcus Thompson, but omitting what it is he did the other night. And what he did the other night is glaring, because it shows that, again, he's lacking consistency. That just when you were ready to anoint him as that guy where it's slowing down and he's got this and he's just going to punish people and he knows now to make the extra pass and he knows how to get the other players involved. And then it was Draymond of last year in his last performance. It was Draymond putting his head down with nowhere to go. It was Draymond throwing the ball to the other team. It was Draymond traveling in deep. It's like he looked like a rookie who had never played before. And say what you will about Podziemski, because I know it doesn't sit well with a lot of people that Podziemski jumped him and is getting more minutes than Kuminga, who's going into his third year. Podziemski he hasn't had a game like that yet, and he's been in the league for 2 months. And this is Jonathan Kuminga going into his third year, and you cannot just simply say, well, he had 6 turnovers, but he's the guy that needs more minutes, and why is Podziemski getting more run than him? Because of what it is that he did last night. You have to focus on his poor performance against the Miami Heat as much as all the promise that he provides as well. And that's Jonathan Kuminga in a nutshell. Good, promising, but also very, very young and raw at times.
Yeah, and inconsistent from Jonathan Kuminga. And I think part of this trade conversation, as we're just talking about, part of it is based on, and the Warriors' decision, whether or not they're going to make a trade, it hinges on a couple of things. First of all, is if they think the team currently is good enough. If you don't think you're good enough, then why make a trade and why mortgage your future? But the other part of this, Dan, and it's something you're talking about there potentially with Jonathan Kuminga's shortcomings at times in his career, is because the most valuable trade piece that you're giving up is your young assets, Jonathan Kuminga or Moses Moody, draft picks, those sorts of players who have value for you moving forward. But the other thing that you need to consider when determining if you want to make a trade and try to help this team win right now is, what are you giving up on? Are you confident that what you're trading away, again, Kuminga or Moody or potentially both draft picks, are you convinced that those players can be like championship core players in your future? Because this is an opportunity cost situation. It's not about just what you're getting. It's about what you're giving up on. What are you missing out on if you move on from Jonathan Kuminga? Do the Warriors think that Jonathan Kuminga is a legit centerpiece on a team for them moving forward? Can Kuminga and Moody and Trace Jackson-Davis and Brandon Podziemski, can that be a core four that leads you to legitimate championship contention moving forward? For me, the answer is a clear hell no. It doesn't seem like that at all for me. So maybe something that encourages the Warriors to make a move, Dan, even if they're not convinced that the team is good enough right now, maybe part of what convinces them to make a move and to move off of some of their young pieces is that they don't have confidence in that young group moving forward. If you don't think that they're good enough to legitimately lead you to contention, say 3-4 years down the road, why are you keeping them? What are they doing for you if you're not confident in them moving forward? So while I'm not sure the Warriors team is currently good enough to warrant a big move and to warrant a trade, I'm not sure the Warriors have young pieces that are good enough to keep them from making a move and to keep them from moving on from those guys. And that's kind of the conundrum the Warriors are in, because I can poke holes in both sides of this argument right now.
All right, let's reiterate once again from Adrian Wojnarowski. This broke about an hour ago. The New York Knicks finalizing a deal with the Toronto Raptors, one that would send OG Anunoby to Manhattan to play for the Knicks in exchange for R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations. Shams Charania also adds in from The Athletic that he revealed that the draft choice will be a second-round pick. Now, many have clamored for the Knicks at 17 and 14 to make the trade in wake of the Mitchell Robinson injury. But once again, to repeat, OG Anunoby has been traded from the Toronto Raptors to the New York Knicks for R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and reportedly a second-round pick. Why is it noteworthy? Well, OG Anunoby was one of the guys that reportedly was bannered about as potentially a guy that might fit here with the Golden State Warriors. Were the Warriors in on that trade? Or was Mike Dunleavy Jr. a guy that's like not willing or not yet as far as pulling the trigger and trying to bring somebody like that, not willing to give up on his youngsters, waiting for the return of Draymond Green, or were they active and just simply didn't have the assets to turn the head of the Toronto Raptors? We'll continue to discuss all that and much more. It's Mark Granning, it's Dan Avone, it's Warriors This Week. We'll be back after this.
Attention taxpayers. If you or your business owe the IRS back taxes or have years... Warriors This Week continues on 95.7 The Game.
Warriors This Week with Mark Grandy and Dan Devone. Coming up later this evening, later this afternoon, Mark Grandy, of course, will have the pregame show beginning at 4:30 as the Warriors take on the Dallas Mavericks. Grant will also have, of course, the postgame show, the Warriors taking on a Maverick team that may be without Luka Doncic and his 33 points a game, one of the best players in the NBA, and certainly the key to the success of the Dallas Mavericks. Kyrie Irving also on the shelf as the Warriors with another golden opportunity, but this sounds very familiar, going into that game against the Miami Heat with a chance to beat a banged-up Heat team, but it didn't work out. In fact, they got worked by Miami as the Heat beat them going away by double digits. Same sort of scenario tonight. Should Luka Doncic not be available, the Warriors at 15-16 on the season to take on the Dallas Mavericks. Once again, all the action can be heard beginning at 4:30 with the pregame show. Tip is at 5:30. Let's get out to the phone lines. 888-957-9570. That's 888-957-9570. Roy's in San Leandro. Hey, Roy, welcome aboard.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. I just wanted to mention, I have two real fast questions. The first one is about Draymond Green. If the Warriors did trade him, what do you think they can get for him?
Well, that's sort of a large question. Depends on who's asking, where he potentially might go. I would say this about Draymond Green is that right now they don't have much leverage, and I'm talking about the Golden State Warriors, because obviously he's on a suspension. So you're going to get lowballed. You're not going to get – if you're talking about Draymond Green and trading him at the beginning of the season before the suspensions, I think you'd get a lot more in return. But just generally speaking, you're going to get lowballed by GMs because they're going to say, look, the guy's on suspension. This is somebody that's been so problematic. We'll take him off of your hands. Here's X, Y, and Z. Whereas if he comes back to this team and is the Draymond Green of old, or at least the Draymond Green of early on in the season, and is good defensively, and also I'd add offensively, his numbers have stepped up this year, but he proves to be that commodity that has always been coveted by that of the Golden State Warriors and sort of the personality of this team, well, then his draft status and his stock elevates, if that answers the question.
Okay, the last thing I know this is talking about basketball, but I just have a real fast baseball question. Even though this guy named Ohtani signed with the Dodgers, and then they got that other guy, Yamamoto, and all like that, wouldn't you say that the cure to the Giants, like when the Giants first came here back then in the late 50s, the cure, the Giants build up their farms, they had their farm systems built up real good. And wouldn't it be wise for the Giants to go ahead on, and since they can't get nobody, a good premium hitter, to come there to AT&T, to just go ahead on and build their farm systems up to offset that, what the Dodgers have done.
Roy, this is Warriors This Week. But for the sake of conversation, we'll entertain it. Why not? We'll turn into Giants This Week. And to answer your question, you're right, Roy. You know your baseball. That if you're having a hard time luring free agents, and the Giants have the money, right? They have the money coming off the books. It's just they can't land free agents for whatever reason. They don't want to come to San Francisco, whether it's Aaron Judge or the before-mentioned Shohei Ohtani. So if you're the GM of the Giants, you sure as hell better have a strong farm system because you can plug and play guys. We'll see, because the jury's still out with Casey Schmidt and Patrick Bailey and Luciano and Matos. But you're right. To your point about the Los Angeles Dodgers is that not only do they have money, but they replenish guys every single year. That is the best franchise in baseball. That is the best farm system in baseball. And as a GM, if you can't bring in the free agents, you should have a fallback plan, and that fallback plan being your farm system. But I digress, Grant.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Roy said, or what Roy asked about Draymond Green. I think you laid it out well, that his value right now is at an all-time low for a number of different reasons. Also, the fact that he's still got 3.5 years left on his contract, and you really don't know what his future in this league is. That's obviously a big factor. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting that has maybe worked against Draymond Green throughout his entire future was the argument that Draymond Green is only a good player because he's on the Warriors, right? Like, he's alongside these great shooters, Steph and Clay, and He fits perfectly with that group, but put him on any other team and you'll see he's not a good basketball player. The only reason he's a defensive player of the year, the only reason he's a winner, the only reason he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer, although some of these suspensions might be hurting his chance at that. The only reason he's this good of a player is because he was on the Golden State Warriors, and that was kind of the argument against Draymond Green for all these years. I think there's a little bit of truth to that maybe his value is always higher on the Warriors than somewhere else. But if the Warriors are thinking about trading him, that argument, which I think there is some validity to, works against them because he's more valuable to the Warriors than he is on other teams. His value, as you mentioned, is already at an all-time low right now. So when he's worth more to you than he is to other teams, and his value is at an all-time low, this is not the time to trade him. You're almost kind of stuck with him, it feels like. Now, maybe there is a younger, super talented team that needs that kind of veteran who's been through the battles. I mean, I know the Sacramento Kings for like the last year and a half have kind of been rumored as interested in Draymond Green. Over the offseason, when he was a free agent, that was a rumor. I've seen people on our YouTube chat say a team like the Dallas Mavericks, who don't have a ton of that kind of veteran grittiness, who have been through the battles in the postseason. I know they have, Kyrie, who's won a title and all of that, but they're kind of missing that kind of player. But the Warriors are not trading Draymond Green, and they're certainly not doing it right now when they're going to get peanuts in exchange for him. So I think Draymond Green is a Warrior for the extended future, unless something happens and he's no longer in the NBA anymore, which is on the table considering what the NBA has been doing to him with these punishments and suspensions. But no, I would be shocked if the Warriors trade him, partly because they just can't get much for him at this point.
The Warriors have always done things differently. They're sort of 1-1 when you think about how they play basketball. And Draymond Green, I hate to this sounds really elitist. I don't mean to go after people, and I hate when people throw out, well, you just don't know basketball. But if you're telling me that, and not you obviously specifically, but when people say that he wouldn't fit in with another team, it only works with the Golden State Warriors, there's some truth to that. But this is one of the smartest basketball players in the history of the game. Yeah. And he's going to have an impact wherever he goes. The truth to what it is that some people are saying that, he's only good with the Golden State Warriors is that, yeah, the Warriors do it differently. And I pointed Kevon Looney. Remember Kevon Looney when he was up for free agency a year ago, I want to say? And I don't know, he and his agent, they tested the waters, but they realized that, you know what? Kevon, you might be better off right there with the Golden State Warriors because it fits in only one place, and that's with Steve Kerr and company. And as good as he was, and as instrumental as he was in helping them win that championship against the Boston Celtics, he still only came in at about $9 million. But Kevon Looney, I think that maybe Sacramento or maybe in another uniform, he's not the same guy because the Warriors, again, they do it a little bit differently than everybody else in the NBA, and that's benefited Draymond Green. But let's not get it crooked here that Draymond Green is one of the best basketball players, and he's a Hall of Famer, and it's because of maybe the stuff that you can't read on a stat sheet, but it's what it is that we've alluded to throughout the majority of this morning. It's the defense, it's the personality, it's the energy, and just the defensive rotations and just all the intangibles he means to winning basketball, and that's Draymond Green, who has made a career out of making winning basketball plays.
You know what, a lot of people use and say to describe like a good point guard or a really good offensive player. They make everyone else on the court better, right? Like Steph Curry makes everyone else on the court better because he draws all this attention and he frees up shooting lanes and cutting lanes and passing lanes for everyone else. Draymond Green is the same way on the defensive end. You watch him defend, he's not just defending with, his body. He is like literally shoving his players, his teammates, get out to the wing, young fella. Like, you got to be over there. He's directing everyone. He is defending his player. He's sagging off to help against the drive. He's coming over from the weak side and blocking a shot. He's rotating quicker than anybody else. The way that Steph Curry, the way that Chris Paul in his prime, the way that LeBron James makes their own team and teammates better on the offensive end of the floor, Draymond Green does that defensively, and maybe not as much now as he once did, but I'm with you. The idea that Draymond Green is only good because he plays next to Steph and he plays in this Steve Kerr system with the Golden State Warriors. That's the only reason he's a good basketball player. It's laughable, honestly. He'd be good on any team in any system in the NBA because he's just simply put a really good basketball player. But you're right in that his value is at an all-time low at the moment, and the Warriors certainly not before he comes back, but I would argue no point in the future the Warriors are going to be trading Draymond Green. They just signed on for 4 more years from him. I know decisions and opinions can change quickly, but he's still a quality basketball player. And again, if the Warriors are going to be any sort of competitive this season, next season, it will be because Draymond Green returns and plays well. They're simply not nearly as good of a basketball team without him.
They've always been a talented team, but they were a talented team without an enforcer. And that's what he has provided to this basketball team. Throughout the years, in the championship run, a bunch of nice guys, and you talk about Steph and Clay and even Iguodala, but there was nobody that was that, the guy that walked behind them down the alley with the big stick, and it was him. And it was his intensity and walking on that edge with the hard fouls. That's why you won titles. You don't do it with just a bunch of nice guys. There has to be somebody that's going to be dirty, and there's going to be somebody that does the dirty work, the lunch pail guy, if you will. And he's the glue, to me, that is as important to anything else, to the reason, the direct sort of cause and effect as to why you won as many titles as you did. We're going to get back out to the phone lines. But once again, I just want to reiterate the breaking news that came down earlier this morning. The New York Knicks have traded for OG Anunoby from the Toronto Raptors in exchange. The Toronto Raptors getting R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations. And according to reports, those draft considerations include a second-round pick. So once again, OG Anunoby, a guy that had been rumored to potentially come to the Golden State Warriors, now off to Manhattan to play for the New York Knicks in exchange for R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations, and that draft is a number 2 pick. All right, let's get out to San Francisco and check in with CJ, who wants to join the conversation. What's up, CJ?
Hey, how you doing today? There's a lot of talk here about if we should trade Draymond or who we should trade, and my follow-on question of that is, what is Kerr and Dunleavy's plan, and what do they want to get? Are they trying to recreate the early teen Warriors, tic-tac-toe, all that greatness, or do they need to reshape what the team is and build around Steph in a different way?
I think to answer that, just to be completely blunt with you, they're looking to win right now. If your question is, are they looking to rebuild? Are they looking to the future? No, this is a team that is in that conversation every year to win an NBA championship. That's how they see things. Much like that of the 49ers, that this is a team that the goal is to get to the NBA Finals and win the Finals. Now, that standard was set when you win 4 titles with this core and this coach. So the idea that you're going to rebuild, Steph is into that. And I don't think, not only is Draymond and Clay, the future is now, but I don't think their head coach, Steve Kerr, is down for a transition as well. And that creates, a lot of where we're at. If Steve Kerr is so in on, this, once again, the core of this basketball team, this aging core of Steph, Draymond, and Clay, is it at the expense of not playing and developing some of the young players? And that's really sort of, I think that of all the things that we've discussed and everything that's gone wrong and all those points of contention up to this point, early on in the season, that might be at the very top.
Yeah, no, it might be. And do you remember when Mike Dunleavy addressed the media for the first time after the Draymond Green suspension? Not the first one, but this current one that he's serving. He was asked, how much does this Draymond indefinite suspension, we don't know how long he's going to be out, how much does this suspension impact your future big picture roster decisions? And the question was really aimed at Draymond's future. The reporter, I think it was Anthony Slater, just didn't exactly phrase it that way. But the question was, as far as I could tell, kind of reading between the lines, the question was, how does this latest Draymond Green suspension affect his future on the Golden State Warriors? That's essentially the question. And the way that Mike Dunleavy decided to answer it was, well, it doesn't really impact it at all. What impacts our roster decisions moving forward is how we play in these next 15 to 20 games, likely without Draymond Green for all of them, probably for the most part. So, I mean, even right after it happens, when you're still emotional from what happened, you're still dealing with the initial shock of an indefinite suspension, a question legitimately about Draymond Green's future was answered by saying, the suspension doesn't really impact things. It's more about how we play, which leads me to believe that what the Warriors are considering is not a trade of Draymond Green. It's a trade of other people, because the Warriors are still set that Draymond Green is part of their present and part of their future. How they play in the next 15 to 20, now maybe the next 10 to 15 games, how they play in those games determines what other pieces they might consider moving. But every answer, everything, every indication from Steve Kerr, from Mike Dunleavy, at least in my mind, Dan, reads as if Draymond Green still has his normal place on this Golden State team now and in the future. And maybe you disagree with that, and maybe you're upset with that, and maybe you're just sick and tired of Draymond. That's totally fine. I don't blame you one bit for that. All I'm saying is it seems like the Warriors have not even considered for a moment a future without Draymond Green.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Well, I think that, to your point, when you think about the Golden State Warriors right now, and you mentioned this, there's Steph Curry and there's everybody else. With Steph Curry and Draymond Green, you know what you're getting. All right, I know who Draymond is. I know what I'm getting, and more often than not, he's going to give me solid play. I know the minutes. I know what he's going to do defensively. He is my second most reliable basketball player. And then when you look at the list going from there, Klay Thompson, hit or miss. Good some nights, disappears on others. Andrew Wiggins, we have detailed and talked about this guy ad nauseum. I have no idea what the hell's wrong with this guy at this juncture. But clearly, the model of inconsistency. Jonathan Kuminga, yes, I get it. He's a trigger guy, and he gets a lot of people excited and divides the room. Tremendous talent. And when he's on, I mean, he looks like the future of this franchise. But then there are nights like that against Miami, where he's a minus 26 and 6 turnovers. Podziemski in his first year in the NBA has never come close to numbers like that. So the Jonathan Kuminga consistency, or the lack thereof, is a real thing. Draymond Green is the one guy on this basketball team that you know, along with Steph Curry, that you're getting night in and night out. You cannot even think about moving a guy and then inserting pieces that are good some nights and then disappear others, which really, in a nutshell, is describing the Golden State Warriors.
The only thing I would add to that, Dan, is when he's available. That is a big if now at this point. And when he does come back, it will be at some point. I think it's likely in January at some point. And honestly, I think it's probably in the first half of the month or maybe mid-January, but not late January. When he's available, he's good. But when you're talking about Draymond Green, you have to preface it with that, because he has a history, a propensity to simply not be available. And as I'm seeing on the YouTube chat, on the Comcast Business text line, 888-957-9570, he's one mistake away from a season-long suspension, and then you don't see him again for months. Like, that is the reality of Draymond Green. So I agree with you. When he's available, he is a great asset for a team still, which is remarkable considering his age and everything that he's been through. But a big major red flag around Draymond Green is his availability, and you never know when that next suspension is going to be coming. It's just the reality of the Warriors situation with them right now.
I'm willing to bet that he is going to play nice when he comes back. I'll take that bet, that he's not going to get suspended again. And if he does, well, then we can revisit all of this.
What about ejected but not suspended? You think he gets ejected again?
If he gets ejected, he gets ejected, because that's Draymond has to. That's the high wire act that is Draymond.
When is his first technical when he returns? Over under 2.5 games. Does he get his technical?
I hope it's the under, because if it's the under, then I know he's got the same fire as in the belly. The last thing you want this dude to come back as a changed man. Yeah, we all hope that whether it's rage or whatever it's manifesting in the back of his head, whatever it is that he's saying on a couch somewhere to some therapist, I hope he fixes himself. Hell, we all need help, right? But as far as a basketball player, I'm sorry, man, that rage has still got to be there. Now, you can't be punching guys and you can't be getting guys in headlocks, but you still better have the fire in the belly. Otherwise, you're no longer the same player. So, yeah, I'll take the under. I hope he gets a tech. That tells me that he's still the same guy. He's got to have that fire in his eyes to be Draymond Green. Now, he's obviously got to learn that, you can't cross that line, certainly at this juncture. I also argue, here's another way to spin it, and maybe a better way for Warrior fans to think about it, that as an aging basketball player, and there's a lot of wear and tear on Draymond Green and those tires, is that this is that unintentional sort of rest, right? We've seen this intermittently throughout the last couple of years where you don't want Draymond and you don't want to see Steph Curry go down with injuries, but what has happened, especially in that championship year, that inadvertently what it's done is that he's had his legs in the postseason. And so if you want to put a positive spin on this, just think about Draymond Green getting a nice month rest, and that he's going to be revitalized at the most important part of the campaign. I mean, this is, a weird way of getting load management, if you will.
I like you trying to find the positive in this. Maybe if the Warriors were like 25-15, or I guess what would it be, more like 20-15, whatever their record is right now, a game under 500, 15-16. If they had 5 more wins and 5 fewer losses, if they were around 20-10, 20-11, something like that, I could maybe buy that a little bit. But the Warriors are in a fight just to make the playoffs. And I know there's still a ton of time left. You've got, 51 games left? You've played 31. You've got 51 games left. You still have so much time. But I like you trying to spin it that way, but the Warriors don't feel that way because they're in a fight just to try to even get to the postseason. They need Draymond Green to be a part of that. If they could get there without him, and if you could guarantee him, like, the 6th seed again, you avoid the play-in, and you're the 6th. You don't have home court, but they didn't have it last year, and they won in the first round. If you could guarantee the Warriors the 6th seed, then hell yeah, they're fine with Draymond Green getting some time off, getting off his feet, and making sure that he's healthy and ready to go for the postseason. But this season feels a little bit different for the Warriors. I know last season was tough all year long, but this year feels a little bit different. Because the Warriors, it does not feel like the postseason, let alone just the, avoiding the play-in, but let alone even getting to the play-in. That does not feel like a guarantee like it has been in years past.
All right, really quick before we get to the break the 5, which WWE move is Draymond going to do next? Suplex? Pile driver? Figure 4? I like it. Some WWE knowledge here. How about the 5-knuckle shuffle from John Cena? Come on. Are you leaving that John Cena out of the mix? I want to hear some WWE moves for Draymond Green. We're here for you. 888-957-9570. When we come back, Grant, I want to address this. I know we do this from time to time, but Bob Myers, and I want to do some redrafting. And I don't think, and it's not to go after the guy, but really when you think about the state of affairs, and we said this at the time, you cannot miss on those lottery picks. Let's just revisit what happened to the 2021 draft. We'll do that with Mark Grandy and Dan Avone and Warriors This Week after this.
Boy, am I glad to be done with my holiday shopping.
Oh, I know.
And now I just want to relax.
Me too. Well, except there's one more store we should check out.
Oh, no way.
Because this week we can get a Sam. Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Warriors This Week with Mark Grandy. It's Dan Navone. Once again, we want to get you updated on breaking news this morning. The New York Knicks trading in a trade with the Toronto Raptors, getting OG Anunoby in exchange, going to the Toronto Raptors, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and the second-round pick. That second-round pick is, according to Shams Charania, the news being broken by Adrian Wojnarowski, that the New York Knicks finalizing a deal with the Toronto Raptors, one that would send OG Anunoby to the Knicks in exchange for RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a second-round pick. As we welcome you into Warriors This Week, once again, the pregame show beginning at 4:30. Mark Grandy will take you right up until 5, handing things over to Tim Roy. And then it's the Warriors and the Dallas Mavericks at 5:30 as they tip from Chase. The Golden State Warriors looking to get back to 500. Luka Doncic has the quad issue. It's doubtful he'll play. On the shelf also is Kyrie Irving, as the Warriors with a great opportunity here to get to 500. But very similar to what we said the other night when the Miami Heat were without some of their key players, including Jimmy Butler, but it was not to be as they get blown out and they fall to a sub-500 team at 15 and 16. I know, look, Bob Myers has left the building, but has he just left this cupboard bare? I think it's worth revisiting, and I want to go back to that 2021 draft because so much.
Really quick, Dan, can I offer one thing really quick before we change gears just a little bit? This is relatively obvious, but I wanted to put it out there. Woj is also reporting that the Raptors are continuing to explore trades involving Pascal Siakam, but there are no deals with traction for him now. Makes sense if they're trading OG Anunoby. They're likely going to trade Pascal Siakam as well. They're both on expiring deals, so that makes sense. But it is important to note that the Raptors do seem to be open to trading Pascal Siakam, which obviously is important for the Warriors.
I want to say Siakam's contract is at $29 million. I know I'll let you.
It's around there. I'll look it up.
So the expiring contract is a level of concern because you're not just going to get him and give up all this youth, including if it's Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody or whomever, even Andrew Wiggins, and have a guy who's just going to be a rental.
$37.9 million
$37 million.
And last year of his deal.
All right, so Wiggins has got to be part of that deal. Chris Paul's got to be part of that deal if things are going to match.
One of those guys, yeah.
So the question then becomes, is he just going to play out the remainder of the season and then get back into the free agent market, which would be a complete waste for the Golden State Warriors? I think that oftentimes these conversations, before you pull a trigger like that, you have a conversation with the agent, Pascal Siakam, and you throw out a number just to make sure. And sometimes you can lock them up to the extension during the season, knowing that you've already had these discussions before making the trade. There has to be some level of security for the Golden State Warriors or anybody else that's going to give up, future assets to get a player who's on an expiring contract. So that would be my thinking. If you're going to pull the trigger on him, there has to be some level of discourse that at least there's a good chance that he's going to stay with your basketball team. All right, going back to 2021. So Jonathan Kuminga, now look at, when you look at that draft, Cade Cunningham, I think, has established himself as one of the rising stars in this league. Jalen Green, same can be said about him. Evan Mobley is a star, although he's currently injured with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Scotty Barnes, clearly one of the premier
He's incredible.
With the Toronto Raptors. And I think that when you think about Toronto, I think he now becomes sort of the centerpiece, right? If you're going to build around a young player, Scotty Barnes, as you get rid of the OG Anunobys, and it looks as though Pascal Siakam's on his way out. Jalen Suggs has been very, very good with the Orlando Magic. The same can be said about Josh Giddey. And then you get to the Warriors pick of Jonathan Kuminga. I don't know, Mark, just go ahead and handicap. I mentioned I went right through, Cunningham, Green, Mobley, Barnes, Suggs, and Giddey, and then Jonathan Kuminga. How would you rate him? Now, I think it's important to keep in mind that you're talking about, with Cunningham, it's the Pistons. With Green, it's the Rockets. With Mobley, it's the Cavaliers. With Barnes, it's the Raptors. With Suggs, it's the Magic. And with Giddey, it's the Thunder. All of those teams are rebuilding. So all of those young players are going to get run, right? They're going to get an opportunity to make their mistakes. It's a different situation, which you have to take into consideration for young players joining the Golden State Warriors, namely Jonathan Kuminga. But just go ahead up to this point, if you were to compare him to the players that were taken before him in the 2021 draft.
Well, I mean, it's not really close, right? I mean, Jalen Green probably is the other major disappointment in the top 7, along with Jonathan Kuminga.
And what did I say about Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga?
They're both G League guys.
Thank you very much.
G League Ignite. Yeah, we get it. Yeah. You don't like Scoot Henderson either, Dan. Still very early. We'll see about those guys. But Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga in the top 7 seem to be the most eye-opening in terms of bad picks. I mean, you mentioned Cade Cunningham. Despite the fact that the Pistons have lost 28 straight games, Cade Cunningham is a star.
Yes, he is.
He's incredible. I think something like his last 5 games, he's averaging 30-plus on insane shooting splits. First player in NBA history to average those numbers. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I can try to find it during the next break. But he's the only player in NBA history to average those numbers through, I think, a 5-game span and have his team lose all 5 games. Like, he's doing historic things on the saddest story in the NBA right now. Evan Mobley is hurt, but he's a unicorn as well. You talk about Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama. Evan Mobley isn't that level of, has guard skills in a big body, but he's awesome. He's an incredible player. Scotty Barnes might be the best of all of them. Jalen Suggs is a really quality player on a good Orlando team that the Warriors will see coming up in a couple of games. Josh Giddey has some off-the-court issues and some legal issues potentially that could affect his future. But as a basketball player, Dan, if we are to just ignore that other stuff, as a basketball player, he's incredible. He's phenomenal. Franz Wagner picked right after Jonathan Kuminga.
Well, that's where I wanted to go.
That's the one that hurts the Warriors. But there's, I think, a relatively clear cutoff point, like after right around 7, 8, 9. Almost everyone ahead of that, really, really good. And then you got a lot of misses after that, which I guess is normal for drafts, generally speaking. But this seems to be, for the most part, a pretty well-drafted year. Like, you have the best players playing their best in the top 7, in the top 8. You got a miss for almost everyone. Alperen Şengün, center for the Rockets, who was picked 16th overall. But beyond that, you don't really have a ton of guys who you feel like, were absolutely missed on that got drafted late. It feels like teams did a pretty good job. It's just unfortunate for the Warriors. It seems like one of the misses was them at number 7 overall when you had a chance at Wagner right after him.
Well, that's where I wanted to go, because you can't blame Bob Myers and you can't put that on him for players that were drafted in front of Jonathan Kuminga. There's nothing he can do about Cade Cunningham and Scotty Barnes and any of those players that went 1 through 7, I want to say. So, let's see. Yeah,
Kuminga was 7.
Okay, so 1 through 6. Yeah. So Jonathan Kuminga, number 7. But I do have something to say about Franz Wagner, because he was available to the Golden State Warriors. And you're talking about, even back in 2021, someone at 6'10" that can do what it is that he's been able to do. And that's on Bob Myers. I mean, look at his numbers this year. 31 games played. He's getting 34 minutes a run, 21 points a contest, 46 from the floor. He's under 30% from three-point territory, but this guy is 6'10" and providing, close to 6 rebounds a contest. He's just what it is that the Warriors covet, and he was right there, and they went Jonathan Kuminga. So when you just think about getting an opportunity in the lottery, and Moses Moody, Şengün, another guy at 6'10" that they passed on, that if you were to do a redraft, I think it's clear to everybody that the Golden State Warriors, picking at number 7 in 2021, would have gone Franz Wagner and would have gone Şengün.
Absolutely. There's no doubt.
And that's on Bob Myers. When you're in the lottery, again, and we know there's a high level of risk, but you knew that this was such a rare opportunity for a team that was still in the conversation of winning NBA titles with your core still in their prime, and you get a shot at the lottery, and it looks as though you missed with James Wiseman and you missed with Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody. Now, that's a little bit premature because, both of those players are so young. But as of right now, if we were to do a redraft, I think Warrior fans as well as the Warrior staff would much rather have a Franz Wagner. And to fast forward and put it into today's GM, that being obviously Mike Dunleavy, you look at the 2023 draft. What is it that Bob Myers would have done if he was still with the team? Would he have gone Podziemski? Would he have gone Trace Jackson-Davis? I'm willing to bet no. And if you were to redraft this year's, and it's still early, right, Mark? But if you were to redraft the 2023 draft, I've heard this. I think it was Bill Simmons was talking about this. Podziemski goes at number 3, and I think potentially you're talking about Trace Jackson-Davis going to number 4. I mean, it's the difference between a guy that hits on a draft and missing on a draft. And keep in mind, the Warriors were not in the lottery this year. And so while it's not fair to go after, Bob Myers, who has done so many good things for this team, but I do think if you're going to talk about the state of affairs with the Golden State Warriors currently, you have to think about some of their mistakes and their mishaps with an opportunity to abridge this dynastic run and to carry them into the future. And it looks as though they came up empty with James Wiseman and potentially Kuminga and Moses Moody.
Yeah, no, I mean, the draft history of Bob Myers is no secret, and it really hasn't been pretty. The big asterisk on all of it is, for the most part, they had been picking late, but the 3 times they got to pick early with James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, you can poke holes in all of those picks. Now, I think where Bob Myers made his money and made a name as one of the best general managers in the NBA is everything besides the draft. And at this point, Mike Dunleavy has done a really nice job drafting. He also made the Jordan Poole trade that got you Chris Paul in return, which certainly has given the Warriors more flexibility, probably made them a little bit better, although I do think the Warriors would like to have another 20-point scorer on their roster right now. Maybe not necessarily Jordan Poole because he comes with some other issues, but the Warriors certainly would like a secondary scorer that they don't have at the moment. But beyond that one trade that Mike Dunleavy made, he hasn't shown an ability, and not against him just because this is his first year. He has plenty of opportunity to do it now. He hasn't shown the ability to improve this team at the trade deadline, which is something, maybe not necessarily the trade deadline, but helping the team besides from the draft. And that's something Bob Myers did time and time again for the Golden State Warriors. So I'll be interested to see how the Warriors and how Mike Dunleavy approaches this trade deadline, because it's his first, and there's potentially been, never been a more fractious time period in this Warriors era. And Mike Dunleavy's kind of thrust into a mess that maybe doesn't have an easy answer to in terms of how to clean it up. So I'm interested to see how Mike Dunleavy navigates this trade deadline, because as we spent the first hour and a half talking about, Dan, there's not an easy answer. There's not an easy solution. You can poke holes in every option the Warriors have moving forward. It's almost where the Warriors not choosing the lesser of two evils, but they have to choose the lesser of 5 bad options. They just have to find the best option of the bad options. And Mike Dunleavy is tasked with doing just that. It's not an easy challenge for a first-year GM. So I'm very curious to see how he navigates it, because there is no surefire answer. Even if there is a potential star available to help this team, there's no surefire answer. And it's going to mean, waving the white flag, giving up on a couple of players that you had really high hopes for that just haven't quite panned out, as we're talking about here with these draft picks.
I just really quick want to go to the text line of the 510, who was intimating something about Draymond Green that we said earlier. And they're talking about the 510 on the text line saying, you guys said that Draymond Green's on the same platform as MJ, Wilt, LeBron, Shaq, Kobe. I think 510, you misunderstood. We didn't say that Draymond Green is one of the greatest of all time, but one of the smartest basketball players. There's a clear distinction there. Yes, his basketball instincts is on par with anybody that's played this game. One of the smartest basketball players, I stand by that, is Draymond Green. In terms of talent, yeah, of course. I mean, he's not one of the greatest to ever play the game. No, not by a long shot. But in terms of his makeup and his basketball IQ, I'd put him up against anybody. I think there might have been some miscommunication there, 510. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, getting back to Mike Dunleavy Jr. and this trade deadline, there's 2 ways to look at it. Either Dunleavy has just been handed, he's been handed a ship that's been abandoned by that of Bob Myers, who knew to jump prematurely because this thing was going down. Or if you're Mike Dunleavy, And any good GM, and this is true for the NFL as well, you relish moments like this because usually a GM is an innovator and they're a visionary and they want their fingerprints on everything. So if you see this thing where it's complete chaos and you may be heading in another direction, you may be trading future assets, you may be removing a key player that has been synonymous with all these NBA championships, there are some GMs that will embrace a situation in a scenario like that. That they want to be the guy that's going to say, I know what it is that we need to fix this team. They want their fingerprints all over the future of this team. That they feel as though I know what it is that I can fleece from other teams and they can fit with the Golden State Warriors, and I'm the one who can make this team relevant in the future. You have to have a level of confidence just like that of a player that you can keep this thing going. And it's very similar to this year's NBA draft. Mike Dunleavy Jr. is drafting at 19 and 57. Typically that's a throwaway. Those are guys who are going to be sitting on the edge of the bench. They're not going to get any time. See what you can do. And he finds two gems, right? He finds two guys that are, one's cracked the starting lineup and the other, I think it's imminent. It's a matter of time before TJD replaces Kevon Looney as your starting center on the Golden State Warriors.
Looney's questionable tonight, by the way. So we could see it tonight.
And it just tells me that maybe Dunleavy is the guy that it's not. It's easy to look at this as a complete mess, and I wouldn't want to be him. Or maybe Dunleavy is so good at this and so cocky that he's like, bring it on. Let me take this Golden State Warrior franchise to the next step, whatever that might be, or to the future, wherever that might be, and let me go ahead and get the players that could be the future foundation of another NBA championship run.
Yeah, maybe, and I think that would be a good mindset for him to have. Really quickly, someone asking on the YouTube chat, is GP2 back? He is back tonight. He's back. Kevon Looney, questionable. Draymond Green still out. That's the injury report for the Golden State Warriors. I want to ask you something about Mike Dunleavy and kind of that mindset that you're laying out for him at the trade deadline, because he has to consider so many things. We've talked about if the team is currently good enough to warrant a move, if the young pieces are good enough to maybe discourage a move because you want to hold on to them to build for the future. Do you think the Warriors, and specifically Mike Dunleavy at all, are considering like the personal feelings and the emotions of a player like Jonathan Kuminga, who's clearly frustrated and upset at times? I mean, after he does not close the game on Christmas Day in Denver, he talks to Marcus Thompson of The Athletic, who did a really good job writing the piece, and essentially says, like, I feel like I've done enough to start and to close, but I'm not the one determining my minutes. It's frustrating. It's difficult for me because I don't know what my role is. If Jonathan Kuminga is frustrated like that after a stretch of games that he's been starting, do the Warriors consider more than just his ability on the court, what he might return for them? Do you feel like they're taking into account the feelings of some of their players, including Jonathan Kuminga? Because if you let Jonathan Kuminga stay on the roster and Draymond Green returns and GP2 returns, I mean, he's probably not getting more minutes. At very best, he's keeping the same minutes. He's likely playing fewer minutes. He sits on the bench. He continues to get frustrated. And as a result, that might hurt the team. Do you feel like the Warriors are considering more than just Kuminga's abilities on the court and potentially his emotions, his happiness, how he feels being on this roster? I mean, it's something that you and Larry Krueger talked about yesterday here on 95.7 The Game. Maybe Moses Moody needs to be a little bit more angry, a little bit more forceful, and voice his frustrations more. Feels like maybe he gets picked on because he's kind of okay not playing as many minutes as he wants, while Kuminga isn't. Could that be a factor that potentially results in a trade of Jonathan Kuminga?
I think Coach Kerr is sensitive to his players and has a relationship with them and certainly wants them to be, content to a certain degree. But Coach Kerr at the end of the day has to do what is best for basketball and best for his team. I think the bigger concern from aside of all of that is how he plays. And so to answer that question, it wasn't about what it is that he said to Marcus Thompson. It's not about his feelings. It's not about how Steve Kerr interprets all of this, but just simply after those comments, what he did in laying that egg against the Miami Heat. That was the first game after all of that went public with Marcus Thompson and The Athletic and that interview he had with Jonathan Kuminga. And then he comes out again with a minus 26 and the 6 turnovers. That, to me, is where all of this begins and ends. That, yes, there are feelings involved, but all these decisions are predicated on what it is that you do on the slab of hardwood and when you're on the floor. And he wasn't very good. And that was one game that I think that of all the bad performances he's had, and he's had more than his share of stinkers, that was the one that he really needed to play well because he came out, and that's fine. Steve Kerr said he didn't have an issue with it. But if you're going to demand more playing time, and if you're going to come out and say what it is that you said, and I don't have an issue with it, I like confidence. Cocky is good. But you know the old saying, Grant, you got to back it up. And so after what it is that he said to Marcus Thompson, and then in your first game against the Miami Heat, and you do that, 6 turnovers.
All in the first half.
And just completely out of control. And looked as though he was over his head again. And looked as though this game was just too fast for him. Just when you thought he turned the corner. That was disappointing. And I don't hear a lot of the Jonathan, and I know they're out there. A lot of people want to see Jonathan Kuminga get a lot more run, as do I at times. I get it. The athleticism is such a tease. What he did against Denver when he saw Jamal Murray was on him, the old mouse in the house, just give me the ball. I'm going to back this kid down. You know, and he dunked. He was so brutal going to the rim and so vicious and so good. But again, this is what Jonathan Kuminga has been in his brief tenure in the NBA. These snapshots and these glimpses of greatness, and then he retreats into a guy that looks as though this game's going 150 miles an hour, and he has no idea how to slow it down. And it's just when we thought that he had caught up to being the guy making the extra pass and earning those starting minutes, and then there was the other night, which I know a lot of people are dismissive of and want to overlook. But if you're going to be a proponent of Jonathan Kuminga and ask the question as to why, he doesn't get as much time as Brandon Podziemski, well, there's your answer. Podziemski has not played one game like that, and he's only been in the league for a couple of months. So, that's the conundrum, and that's where we're at with Jonathan Kuminga and why he continues to be a trade piece and why you cannot invest in the future with him right now because of performances like that against the Miami Heat. And I don't mean to dog the guy because I was one of his biggest fans, but he's got to show some level of consistency, and he's yet to do that.
Yeah, and I think the rub as well when you talk about the future of him on Golden State is the Warriors are a little bit overloaded at one position. Jonathan Kuminga, Andrew Wiggins, Moses Moody. You can even throw Klay Thompson in that category. I mean, with Brandon Podziemski starting, Klay Thompson is your starting 3 right now. Jonathan Kuminga is your starting 4, and Kevon Looney is your starting 5. The Warriors have a group of wing players who have all been incredibly inconsistent this season, specifically Wiggins, Kuminga, and Klay. And I think you can kind of pare this down a bit, and you get to a point where the Warriors eventually likely will need to decide on Wiggins or Kuminga moving forward. And we could talk a little bit more about this in the final hour. We got a break here in a minute, but I feel like the next couple of weeks we're going to see the Warriors continue trying to find out if Kuminga and Wiggins can play together. It hasn't been a lineup, a pair that Steve Kerr has turned to a lot. He did on Thursday against Miami. They played for like a 5-minute stretch, maybe a little less in the second quarter.
Brutal.
They came in a tie game, and then the Heat outscored the Warriors by 12 points the rest of the way in that quarter. I think in like an 8-possession span with those two on the court, the Warriors turned it over 5 times, and they were all by Jonathan Kuminga. For whatever reason, Kuminga and Wiggins can't play together. It's a small sample size. Maybe things change. I think you'll see Steve Kerr continue to try that, because if they can prove that they can work in the same unit on the court at the same time together, maybe the Warriors can keep both of them, and they don't feel like they get a little bit bogged down by those two players taking up a roster spot. But if that unit continues to struggle, I think the Warriors will get to a point where they feel like they have to move off of one of those, and that could be the beginning of a major trade at the deadline. One of those two, Wiggins or Kuminga.
All right, we'll keep an eye on it as the Golden State Warriors, once again tonight, taking on the Dallas Mavericks. The pregame show starts with my man Mark Grandy at 4:30, and then Tim Roy's got the call with the Warriors and the Mavs coming up at 5:30 tip here on 95.7 The Game. And Warriors This Week also continues right after this.
Hey, did you know the Statue of Liberty is the largest holiday gift ever given? That's a big deal.
Warriors This Week continues on 95.7 The Game.
Mark Randy and Dan Avone got you covered with Warriors This Week. Earlier this morning, there was breaking news from Adrian Wojnarowski. Another Woj bomb. The New York Knicks have acquired OG Anunoby from the Toronto Raptors. In exchange, the Raptors get R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and draft considerations. And we have found out, thanks to Shams Charania, that draft consideration will be a second-round pick. So R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, a second-round pick to Toronto in exchange for OG Anunoby. Also, according to Wojnarowski, that the Toronto Raptors are not done, that they are looking to shop one Pascal Siakam as well. And as it relates to the Golden State Warriors, both of those gentlemen, Anunoby as well as Siakam, have been rumored to coming to the Golden State Warriors. Did the Warriors try and get involved in that deal? Did they just simply not have enough trade commodity to acquire Anunoby? Or were they just sitting and holding tight and waiting for Draymond Green to come back and to see how this thing looks with one of their centerpieces in fold? And when it comes to Pascal Siakam, will they be active in those trade talks as well? All of those things to consider. All right, as I get my voice, let's get out to Ben in Oakland. Ben, what do you have?
Hey, let's see. I think that Steve Kerr's contract status has a big deal to do with trading Jonathan Kuminga. If we look at like the last few years, when they get the talented players, Moody and Kuminga and Wiseman, who aren't high basketball IQ guys, who aren't in the right place at the right time, Kerr's not going to play them. So Kuminga has the high athletic ability, but he doesn't have the basketball IQ to really fit Steve Kerr's system. And when you see like Ty Davis-Price, Podziemski, they played 4 years in college. They know what to do. They know where to go. Boom, they're playing right away. So I think that everything's kind of intertwined together. It's not necessarily Kuminga for this player or that player, but Steve Kerr as the coach is a factor in this as well.
It probably is a factor. You're right, Ben. I hadn't really thought about Kuminga kind of and Kerr as one or the other or something like that. I do think that the Kerr conversation is interesting because if you just rewind to a year ago, it was a similar situation for Bob Myers. Now, maybe Bob Myers had been a little less vocal about wanting to return. I mean, every time in the last year when Steve Kerr has been asked about his future, he said, I still love doing this. I hope I'm the coach of the Warriors moving forward. But then, I mean, the question becomes, why doesn't he have a contract beyond this year? And I don't think a year ago many people really thought that Bob Myers wouldn't be back. So could the Warriors, could Joe Lacob be surprised again? Who knows? I'm not sure I necessarily follow with the, either Bob or Kuminga, or pardon me, either Steve or Kuminga gotta go. But I don't think it's too far-fetched, Dan, to think that Steve Kerr's lack of a contract beyond this season just kind of adds another layer of murkiness into this whole thing. I mean, the other thing the Warriors have to consider is if Steve Kerr doesn't want to come back, if the Warriors, for whatever reason, don't want to bring him back, if they feel like he's mismanaged things this season, which I would argue against, at least I don't think the Warriors would feel that way, because he's just dealing with a tough situation where all of his important players have struggled, aside from Steph Curry. But if for whatever reason Steve Kerr does not come back, does that encourage the Warriors to kind of start anew? And does that mean you don't trade away Kuminga at the deadline? Maybe. So I guess I could see where Ben's coming from, Dan. I hadn't really thought of it that way. But if I'm trying to figure things out right now, I think I'm assuming Steve Kerr is going to be back, and maybe that means you try to give it another run because you have your head coach still. I don't know.
Well, I think the two are linked together because a lot of people feel as though this gets back to Steve Kerr not recognizing and giving young players ample run and or developing some of the youngsters. So there's a lot to unpack there.
You think that leads to Kerr not returning?
No, but I think the two are linked because of that. No, I don't think that Steve Kerr isn't Steve Kerr is going to be the only reason Steve Kerr doesn't return to the Golden State Warriors if he decides to walk away.
I agree.
But the linkage between those two it's sort of systemic when it comes to Steve Kerr and youngsters. And I think Kerr would be the first to admit he was slow to recognize Podziemski and TJD to a certain to a certain degree. But I think just to take a step back, we have to recognize that when you're talking about young players developing, that when you're coming to the Golden State Warriors, a team that's looking to win an NBA championship, it's going to be a very, very different role as opposed to a young player with promise coming out of the lottery going to Detroit. It's a different role if you're going to Utah, Portland, or if you're going to Charlotte, if you're going to the Washington Wizards, where they're all rebuilds. And young players will get an opportunity to play the full 82 games, depending on health. You'll get 30 to 35 minutes of run. You'll make your mistakes and you'll get better so that in your second and third year, you'll be much further along than Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody. That's just not the case for the Golden State Warriors. When they were drafted in 2021, the Warriors won an NBA championship. So how much run is a young player going to get with a veteran-laden team that consists of future Hall of Famers? Not much. But with that being said, I think it's important to note that Jonathan Kuminga specifically, and I remember in the postseason, got significant run against Denver in the first round, got significant playing time against Memphis. And there were some good performances, and there were also some really, really young rookie mistakes in the postseason. He also played against Boston. It's not as though Jonathan Kuminga didn't see the floor as a rookie. So a lot of this is just predicated on the development of Jonathan Kuminga, but as it's related to Jonathan Kuminga exclusively, some of this has to be on the shoulders of Jonathan Kuminga. It's not only relegated to Steve Kerr limiting his growth, not letting him play, not giving him enough minutes, but some of the onus is on Jonathan Kuminga, and some of the responsibility of his development lies with him because he is not further along than a lot of people anticipated. And again, you don't have to look any further than that of Podziemski and Trace Jackson-Davis. And he's had opportunity. And so, yeah, some of the responsibility is on Steve Kerr for not developing a young player like that of Jonathan Kuminga. But again, he did play in the postseason his rookie year and had significant minutes. And he has some limited play that maybe you can say, oh, Kerr should have played him here or there. But again, the onus is on Jonathan Kuminga as a basketball player to show that he's made huge strides, or at least that he's headed in the right direction when getting an opportunity to play. And I cannot overlook what it is that he did right after his comments with Marcus Thompson, how he's not very happy with his role, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he's coming off the bench and he doesn't like the bench, he doesn't like to go to the bench, doesn't like to come off the bench. And understandably, man, he's young with a bright future. But then after that, you got to back it up. After making those comments, the last thing you can do is come out and crap the bed with a minus 26 and 6 turnovers, all of which were in one half. That just, that's not on Steve Kerr. I'm sorry. When it comes to the end of that game, are you going to play Andrew Wiggins? So I know Andrew Wiggins is another story unto himself, but Andrew Wiggins was so good against Denver that you thought, okay, this is the breakout game. So am I not going to play Andrew Wiggins after he showed what it is that he could do against the best team in the NBA and go to Jonathan Kuminga after 6 turnovers and a minus 26? No, logic's going to tell you I'm going to play Andrew Wiggins late in that contest. So a lot of people are upset. Oh, there you go. You're putting Jonathan Kuminga in that Steve Kerr doghouse. A lot of this is on Jonathan Kuminga and not Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr shares maybe a little bit of the responsibility, but again, Jonathan Kuminga, you've got to show that you're ready to earn those key minutes, especially in closing moments.
Let me ask you, what is Steve Kerr's job as head coach of the Warriors? What is he tasked with doing, Dan?
Win games.
Exactly. So what Steve Kerr is doing every single game out is putting together a team, putting together a lineup, putting together a rotation that he thinks gives his team the best chance to win. Now, maybe you disagree. Maybe you think that Kuminga or Moody can impact winning to a greater extent than maybe Kerr feels. Okay, maybe that's fine, but I would just ask you, as you're laying out the inconsistency from Jonathan Kuminga, do you think Moses Moody really playing 25 minutes instead of 10 minutes? You think that's going to be the difference in wins and losses? And don't get me wrong, I think Moses Moody is a fine basketball player, and he'll have a long NBA career because he does a lot of the small things. I could say the same exact thing about Brandon Pajemski. Trace Jackson-Davis has had a nice beginning to his career, and he also seems to really understand the game. Jonathan Kuminga is so incredibly athletic to not have a long NBA career. That doesn't mean they're all going to be stars and they're all going to impact winning at a high level. But if Steve Kerr is tasked with trying to win every single game that he goes out there and coaches in, I can't really blame Steve Kerr for not playing the young guys more. Now, what makes it really difficult is that the veterans that he's turned to and relied on haven't really responded in the way he wanted. Like, if Andrew Wiggins was just having a decent season, Dan, there would still be portions of Warrior fans and a number of people out there who'd be clamoring for more Moses Moody, right? Like, that's just natural. The unknown is very desirable because there's a chance that unknown turns into greatness. But we haven't really seen that just yet, so I don't really feel confident in that. But if Andrew Wiggins was just anywhere near the player he was in the 2022 postseason run, the Warriors, so many of their problems would be solved. They would have probably like 5 more wins right now. They'd be like 9 games over 500. They'd be not only into the postseason race, they'd be out of the play-in. They'd be up around the 5 seed. Like, this would be an entirely different looking basketball team if Andrew Wiggins just kind of figured it out. Maybe you've given up hope on that. Maybe you have. And, I mean, you look at Andrew Wiggins' career, it's looking like 2022 was the outlier. And everything else, like the conversation that we're having right now about Andrew Wiggins is the conversation that Timberwolves fans had about Andrew Wiggins for years. So maybe this is just who Andrew Wiggins is, and maybe it has nothing to do with his mysterious absence last year. Maybe it has nothing to do with the potential injury that he's still not fully recovered from. Maybe it's just who Andrew Wiggins is. But if you were to ask Steve Kerr, who gives him the best chance to win games, it is the chance and the dream that Andrew Wiggins looks like 2022 again. So Steve Kerr is going to give Andrew Wiggins every opportunity to try to get that form back, because if he does, Dan, this team is entirely different. They're so much better if Andrew Wiggins figures it out. When Jonathan Kuminga is at his best, is he a positive impact? Yes, of course. I'm not arguing that. But Andrew Wiggins is the key for this team. And if he figures it out, the Warriors look entirely different. So as a result, Steve Kerr is going to try to let him work through it. Now, it's taking way longer than they would have ever thought or hoped. We're 31 games now into the season, and Wiggins hasn't put together a consistent week, really maybe aside from one all season, and then he slammed his finger in a car door, and it kind of derailed some momentum, and now he's right back to kind of hot and cold, inconsistent, good one game, bad the next. But I still hold on to the fact that, or the opinion in my mind, that the Warriors have a better chance at winning if Andrew Wiggins is playing better, close to where he was in 2022, as opposed to riding the roller coaster with Jonathan Kuminga.
Yeah, and I don't think that the Golden State Warriors 2 years ago, coming off of that tremendous performance against the Boston Celtics, where he was the second best player, and there's some that felt as though, hey, he could have been he could have made an argument to be the MVP in that victory against the Boston Celtics. I don't remember taking many calls, or I don't remember a lot of people saying that when they re-upped him to that contract and they got him basically at a relatively good deal, certainly at market value, at just over $24 million a year. I don't remember a lot of people at the time clamoring that was a mistake.
Oh, everyone was so happy. Everyone was talking about how the dynasty was continuing for the next 4 years after that deal.
Let's get out to the phone lines at 888-957-9570. It's been a while. Mitch in New Jersey. How are you, Mitch?
How you doing, guys? Happy and healthy New Year.
You as well.
I want to see the young players, but going at the Siakam, that'd be awesome. And the Toronto, they're going to keep their good plays. Maybe they should move them to Seattle. What do you think? And thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Mitch. I missed the Seattle part.
I did too.
Okay. I think Mitch was busy taking care of somebody in the back seat of that car.
Seattle, is he talking basketball? There's no team in Seattle anymore, Mitch.
Well, there was. Don't forget that's where Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook
started their careers.
Their rookie years there. So, yeah, the Jonathan Kuminga he's sort of a lightning rod, as is, Andrew Wiggins, because the two sort of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. But I think that, the Andrew Wiggins he gets the benefit of the doubt as opposed to Jonathan Kuminga when it just boils down to, once again, to use your framework, that if it's about winning games, not only who gives me a better chance, but who also gives me a better sense of security at this point. And one is a proven NBA player, a former number one pick, obviously, and a guy that, is averaging at 19 points a game. Maybe that 1 year was the aberration, but it's incumbent upon Steve Kerr to find out,
Which is why the next 5 weeks are so important. And I really think the more I break it down, the more I think about the issues on the Warriors roster, I think the Kuminga and Wiggins unit together, figuring out if they can play together. If I'm guessing we see Kuminga and Wiggins together on the floor at some point tonight against the Mavericks. If they play well and if they continue that moving forward, maybe that means the Warriors feel like they can keep both of them. But if that two-man group, along with whoever's around them, continues to struggle, and it was ugly on Thursday, that unit, that 5-minute span of the game cost the Warriors the game against the Heat. Now, they could have gotten it back later, but they were outscored by like 12 points in a 5-minute span with those two on the court together. But I really think we're getting to a point, Dan, where those two specifically are kind of vying for their future on the Warriors. I think there's a very real possibility where either Kuminga or Wiggins are the focal point of a trade come the deadline, and the next 5 weeks and how they play both individually and then together as well, I think it'll determine ultimately what the Warriors' decision is.
And when you think about the Toronto Raptors, I don't know, Masai Ujiri, is he, because he has those basketball programs in Africa. We know his, how he's ascended to prominence. And you think about, getting ahead of ourselves and trying to make some connective tissues that maybe aren't there. Jonathan Kuminga, a young basketball player from Africa, from the Congo. Can you put 2 and 2 together there? And then if you think about Andrew Wiggins, I think there's 3 places where statistically Andrew Wiggins has his best games. It's Cleveland, Minnesota, and Toronto. Now, Cleveland's understandable because that's the team that didn't want to trade, didn't want him as the number one pick. Remember LeBron James said, no.
Give me Kevin Love.
I want Kevin Love. Minnesota, obviously, because that's the team that traded him. So when he plays against both of those teams, statistically, he has his best games because there's added incentive. There's an asterisk every time he plays Minnesota, every time he plays Cleveland. The third is Toronto.
Canada.
It's in front of family and friends. And that's another place. And he's one of those guys, I talked about this, he's sort of an introvert. He's an emotional cat. And there are things that push this guy's button and he can crawl into a hole. And then there's sometimes where, again, he's dunking on Karl Anthony Towns and it is the quintessential poster. And going back to Toronto could rejuvenate that guy. There are connective tissues to both of those guys when you think about the African connection with Masai Ujiri, and I think it's the Giants of Africa program that he has, that he created out there in Africa. And, of course, a young player from the Congo and Jonathan Kuminga. And then you've got Andrew Wiggins, who is from Canada and specifically from that Toronto area and a place that he's always played well because he's at home.
And do you know who the Knicks just acquired?
Oh, no.
Or, sorry, the Raptors just acquired from the Knicks. R.J. Barrett, Canadian.
Exactly.
Maybe the Raptors are just trying to build the All-Canada squad.
Well, there's something to that. There's something about bringing guys back home that you take into account. Because maybe Andrew Wiggins, the one thing that's going to get him going is, we've got the secret sauce. It's, I wouldn't dismiss it. I know I'm reaching here a bit, but yeah, that's a good point with R.J. Barrett. And I forgot about that, the whole Steve Nash connection. Steve Nash, of course, from Canada, played on the Canadian national team and knows R.J. Barrett's old man, and that whole connection with Canada. And so, Andrew Wiggins is a guy that, and I'm with you, before you trade him to Toronto, before you trade him anywhere, I think you have to see how all of this plays out in the next couple of weeks. But then, I guess, to expedite this, if Toronto's at a place right now where they just moved off of Anunoby and they just made public, according to Adrian Wojnarowski, that they're looking to shop Pascal Siakam, so maybe the Warriors don't have the affordability to wait. If they're going to make the trade, they got to do it a little bit prematurely. And if that's the case, what do you do?
I don't know. I think the Warriors have to hope that the Raptors aren't in a huge hurry to move off of Siakam, because the Warriors have issues and problems of their own and questions of their own to answer, I think, before they feel comfortable pulling the trigger, because the Warriors are kind of stuck between two eras right now. You have the one era, which is Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andrew Wiggins, and the team that won you a championship 18 months ago. And is that team good enough to warrant a big move? And would that team, plus a Siakam, plus whoever it is you go out and get, is that team good enough to win a championship? I don't know if they've done enough at this point to to make you feel belief and encourage that is something that's legitimately possible. But then the other side of it is, do you feel like the youth that you have is good enough moving forward? And does that warrant not moving those guys? Are you confident that Kuminga is a centerpiece of a legitimate contender in, years from now? Do you feel like when Steph Curry's at the end of his contract that Kuminga can be a number 2? Do you think that? I don't think the Warriors necessarily do, but these are still questions that, as you laid out, Dan, specifically with the Wiggins part, these are all questions that they need to answer, I think, before they make a decision. And how do you answer those questions? By getting as much data as you possibly can. So I don't think the Warriors are in any rush to make that move, but maybe the Raptors are. I think the Warriors need to hope that there isn't a ton of interest in Siakam, which is probably not going to happen, because there's probably going to be a decent amount of interest in him because he's a very good basketball player, and he's almost certainly going to be moved. He's on a team with the Raptors that have already signaled they are, giving up on this season, and he's in the final year of his deal. So the Raptors have very, very, very high motivation to try to move this guy. I think the Warriors just got to hope that there isn't a ton of competition for him, or if there is, the Raptors are willing to wait and maybe drive up the price a little bit towards the deadline, because I don't think the Warriors feel comfortable making a decision right now. I think they're really relying on the next month to inform their plan this season and really for the next few years and how this era of Warriors basketball ends.
All right, we continue and wrap up the show here on 95.7 The Game and Warriors This Week. Let's take a little tour around the NBA, and we'll also, of course, get you ready for tonight's game by taking a closer look at the Dallas Mavericks. It's the Mavericks and the Warriors coming up tonight here on 95.7 The Game, beginning at 4:30 with my man Mark Grandy. Get you ready with the pregame show. We conclude this Warriors This Week when we wrap things up after this quick commercial timeout.
Boy, am I glad.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Welcome back. Wrapping up the show alongside Mark Grandy. It's Dan Devone. Welcome you into Warriors This Week. Warriors and the Dallas Mavericks as the Warriors back in action after that difficult loss at the hands of the Miami Heat, in which the Heat came in without some of their key players, including Jimmy Butler, and still ran the Warriors right out of the gym. Golden State really hadn't been blown out this year, so maybe it was just their time, but it was pretty ugly and maybe a new low on what has been a season that has supplied its share of some disappointing performances by the Golden State Warriors. They lost convincingly to the Miami Heat to slide under 500 now at 15-16 on the season. An opportunity tonight against the Dallas Maverick team that comes in with a questionable Luka Doncic, who was clearly the leader on this team, averaging over 33 points a game, leading him in just about every offensive statistical category, and Kyrie Irving unavailable to go as well. 4:30, the pregame starts with my partner Mark Grandy, and of course Tim Roy will have the tip and the call beginning at 5:30, all here on 95.7 The Game. As we start the final half hour of the show, you want to touch on Steph Curry and how Steph Curry seems to be deferring a lot early to games, which could be sort of hurting the Warriors in the back end. Go ahead and detail what you got going there, Mark.
Yeah, I think the Warriors in this situation, we spent the last 2.5 hours talking about all of their problems and all of the questions that they have to answer. It just puts all that much more pressure on Steph Curry to carry the team. And for the most part, I mean, he's done a pretty good job at it. You can't really ask him to do much more than what he has done. He has been struggling to shoot the ball just a little bit. I mean, his last 2 games, he's 10 for 36 from the field, 5 for 21 from downtown. Just 2 games. I mean, he's had stretches like this all the time. It's what happens in the NBA when you shoot as many times as Steph does. But I think one area where the Warriors could really benefit, it is trying to purposefully get Stephen Curry going early in games. I feel like we've seen him, I don't know if it's been the game plan or Steph being a willing passer and trying to get others going, but I feel like there hasn't really been much of an effort to get Stephen Curry quality looks early. And I think it does a couple of things. One, if opponents can just take Stephen Curry out of the game, like it's what happened on Christmas Day when Jokic just would go up to half court and double Steph from the jump. And, they double him right as he crosses half court. He has to pass it off. And at that point, Steph hadn't really gotten going. So as a result, you don't really have Curry in a rhythm offensively. And without getting Curry in a rhythm, it's kind of difficult for everyone else to get going. I mean, if Steph Curry comes out and the Warriors run plays for him off the jump and he hits a couple of threes in the first 4 minutes of the game, suddenly the entire defense is put on their heels and they're fearful of Steph and they're scared that this is going to be a game where he hits 12 threes. And it just changes the whole geometry of the floor. And I think it allows for Kuminga to have the lanes to cut to the basket. It allows Andrew Wiggins, when he comes in off the bench, to have a little bit more room. It allows Klay Thompson to find open spaces in the corner. I feel like the Warriors need to get a little bit more aggressive with searching for Steph Curry offense early, because the other thing that it does, if you can't get Steph into a rhythm early, he's using his second stint in the second quarter as kind of his getting into a rhythm mode. And maybe he's, misses the first couple shots he takes, and suddenly you're at halftime and Steph only has 7 points and you're down by 15 points. Because with all the problems that we've detailed, you need Steph to be great night in and night out to have a chance in most of these games. So I feel like a concerted effort to get Steph Curry going early, first of all, it will help him of course, get into a rhythm early, but it will also help everyone else on the roster who doesn't really quite have the ability to create their own shots at a consistent level. I think you put the fear of God into defenses early by unleashing Steph Curry to the best of your ability. I think it will open up everything else. So I really think that's an area where the Warriors can make a concerted effort to get Steph going early. I think everything else will kind of follow from there.
Well, I think part of this is on Steph, too, because he has essentially the latitude. He's one of the few players in the NBA where Steve Kerr is just do as you do. I don't think there's a lot of restrictions as to what it is the game plan is for Steph Curry. And I think Steph, just from a personal standpoint, just likes to get a little bit lathered before, he becomes Steph Curry offensively. And he likes to get other guys involved. I think he likes to sort of, put his toes into the water, if you will, before he goes full tilt. But to your point, it makes sense because so much happens off of Steph Curry, especially getting other guys involved when you're talking about people moving without the basketball and cutters as well. So certainly something to keep an eye on. Hey, I just want to take a quick tour around the NBA. What is the over and under on the Detroit Pistons winning a basketball game? I think their next game, speaking of the Raptors, I think it's tonight is their next game. I think they play the Raptors later this afternoon. But if you're not familiar with the Detroit Pistons story, it's not a good one. As bad as it's been for the Golden State Warriors, you can wake up every day, Dub Nation, and be thankful you're not a Detroit Piston fan. So they've lost 28 consecutive games, which ties the modern-day record with the Philadelphia 76ers for the most regular season losses in the history of the NBA at 28. In a team that got Monty Williams, who had been fired from Phoenix, and gave him a $100 million contract. So they got a lot of money tied up to their head coach, and it certainly has not gone right for that team. But I'm just curious, does this team, because you don't want to be, that team that loses to the Detroit Pistons. And it almost happened to the Boston Celtics as the Pistons gave away a huge double-digit lead. I think they led by as many as 21 and then lost that game in overtime. So they got the Raptors today. Does it go to 29?
The Raptors without OG Anunoby, they're kind of in an awkward space right now where they're almost giving up on the season. They're still talented, though. We talked about Scotty Barnes. He's awesome. They still have Pascal Siakam at this point. It is, though, in Toronto, or it is in Detroit. So Detroit get a little bit of home cooking going. You never know. After this, they go on to the road, Houston, Utah, the Warriors, and Denver. I'm not sure they're going to get a win on that road trip. Maybe Utah. Utah's been injured and banged up lately. I'm not sure. Although they did just play Utah on the 21st in Detroit, and Utah missed their entire starting five, and Utah still won. I don't know. Tonight might be a decent chance. You kind of face a Toronto team at an awkward time for them. I don't know.
But in all seriousness, when you look at the Detroit Pistons and you look at their starting five, it's really not that bad. You got Cade Cunningham. You got Ausar Thompson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Duren, who's considered one of the up-and-coming bigs.
Really like Duren. He's good.
Bojan Bogdanovic, also a good young player.
Yeah.
So you don't see 0-28 or 28 consecutive game losing streak. And as it relates to the Warriors, yes, I am going to bring it there. Cade Cunningham, a lottery pick, number 1 overall. Thompson, a lottery pick. I think he went, I want to say number 5. Jalen Duren went top 15. I think he went 13 overall. So here are some young, talented players that,
James Wiseman's on that team.
James Wiseman.
Can't really break the rotation. Overall.
So, again, as it relates to the Warriors, when you're saying let the rookies play, let some of these younger players play. Well, look at Detroit. Younger players are getting an opportunity to play. And while we can all see the promise, it takes a while to learn how to win in this league, which is, this isn't a clear indictment on Jonathan Kuminga, but I think you can understand, and maybe it lends to sort of what it is that Steve Kerr is trying to do, which again gets back to your point that he's here to win games. And winning in the NBA, although it's not as difficult as maybe the Detroit Pistons are making it look, but you just don't take it for granted. I've got young, talented players, and now I'm going to win. I got Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, along with, to go along with Podziemski, as well as Trace Jackson Davis and all of this youth. Let them play, because that's the future, and that's how you win games. Well, go look at the Detroit Pistons. with lottery picks, good young players, and an 0-28 record.
Would you rather have the Pistons young players or the Warriors young players? Clearly, it's the Pistons young players. I mean, if you include Cade Cunningham in that, Cade Cunningham's a star.
No doubt.
No doubt about it. And even if you were to throw Stephen Curry onto the Pistons, I mean, they're not losing 28 consecutive games, but, I mean, they're not going to be a legitimate threat. I mean, the NBA is so star-driven now. I mean, Cade Cunningham would be a phenomenal 2. Steph Curry on that Pistons team would be fun, but it's not like they're going to be a favorite to win at all. Like, there's so much that goes into winning. You're right. It's not just about getting the talent. It's about proven talent, finding guys that can fight through all of the stuff that goes wrong during a season, and no one on that Pistons team has been through that. The players on the Warriors have. The players that Steve Kerr is trying to rely on have. So it's just so much more than just trying to put your young, promising players on the floor. I mean, there's a number of Warrior fans who want to see Steph Curry alongside Brandon Pajemski, Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, and Trayce Jackson-Davis. That 5 would fail.
See Detroit Pistons. It would fail. It would not look good. Now, maybe it further develops Kuminga and Moody, and they've got, contract extension negotiations coming up. That's on the horizon for these guys. They're about to enter their 4th season in the NBA. I mean, we're still a ways away from the offseason, but that is on the radar for these guys. Maybe if you just turn to the all-youth lineup and Steph, it develops them and you're sitting prettier 2-3 years from now. That might be the case, but you're giving up on this season if you do that. That's the trade-off. If you are willing to give up on this season, then sure, play the young guys. Fine by me. But you just need to know that if you do that, you're 100% giving up on any chance to do anything this season. And when you talk about playing some of the young players because you have the affordability because you're not expected to go anywhere, it allows you to be good, to your point, maybe 2 or 3 years from now. And you don't have to look any further than what's going on in the Western Conference at the very top. And I'll put this to you. Are you a believer in what the Minnesota Timberwolves are doing, which is currently the number 1 seed at 23-7? The Thunder at number 2 seed at 21-9. And then the Nuggets, which everybody seems to believe is just a matter of time before they overtake those 2 teams, become the number 1 seed, and once again repeat as NBA champions. They still, in my estimation at least, have the most proven and the best starting 5, and their bench leaves a lot to be desired, but I think that's clearly the threat. But are you buying on the youth movement that is leading the Western Conference currently, namely Minnesota and OKC?
I think I'm a little bit more of a believer in Oklahoma City. I think I like the way that their roster fits, and I think they're built a little bit more for the postseason. Minnesota is an awesome story, and Anthony Edwards is a superstar, 26 points per game. Karl Anthony Towns is an excellent number 2. He's been having a fantastic season. I feel a certain kind of way about Rudy Gobert, and I think that teams can play him off the court in the postseason. And he's one of their better players. I mean, it happened with the Jazz for years in a row, consecutively. Rudy Gobert would win Defensive Player of the Year every single season. He'd be an all-star. He has all these awesome accolades, but when the postseason comes around, he gets played off the court because he can't stick with these smaller, more athletic lineups. Now, the Western Conference specifically, but the NBA as a whole is getting bigger. You talked about Nikola Jokic, obviously, and the Denver Nuggets. He's the best player in the NBA. Joel Embiid is up there with him. They're both big guys. The Timberwolves are as big as any with both Towns and Rudy Gobert. Chet Holmgren on OKC, they're big, but these new bigs are different kind of bigs. They're not Rudy Gobert kind of bigs. They're the unique bigs that kind of have a guard skill set, but are in a 6'10", 6'11", 7-foot body, and they're able to control games from kind of the outside in as opposed to from the inside like bigs of the past would do. So I believe a little bit more in Oklahoma City. It doesn't mean that I don't think Minnesota's a really good basketball team, but when it comes to Rudy Gobert, he tends to not have as big of an impact, nearly as big of an impact in the postseason as he does in the regular season. But certainly, I mean, I would pick the Minnesota Timberwolves to beat the Warriors in a playoff series. Like that's pretty easy for me right now. But in terms of winning it all, I don't really see Minnesota given the way their roster is constructed. But Oklahoma City, Dan, OKC scares me. They only have more young assets coming with all the draft picks they have on the way. Oklahoma City, I think, is real, and they're going to be real for a while.
Well, you talk about the draft picks that they have. There's a lot of talk that they're going to get active at the trade deadline because they have so many.
So much flexibility.
That there's a chance that they, but I don't know who's expendable, but they got those draft picks that maybe you don't have to move anybody that's a key component of that team right now.
Like, that might be a nightmare for the Warriors. If Oklahoma City gets into a bidding war with the player the Warriors want, OKC has picks galore. They could offer everything to Toronto or whoever it is that might be trying to move someone, and the Warriors might just be out of luck because they can't match that.
And when you think about Minnesota, Tim Conley, who built that team, he's the same architect of the Denver Nuggets, and he likes to go big. Like, he did it with Jokic, he did it with Gordon. He loves big players, even Michael Porter Jr., and you see with Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, and a lot of people are like, God, this makes no sense. But we talk about how small ball has maybe had its time. I mean, you see someone like Conley who comes in and wants to build this from the ground up, but do it old school with 7-footers and 6'10" guys. And it seems to be working out there in Minnesota because that is a very, very big basketball team. And we'll see going forward, but I think it's interesting just in terms of philosophy, how this idea of go small and address the three-point line. Well, I think the three is something that's got to be incorporated in every single basketball team. But the idea of going big now seems to be more in vogue than it ever has been in the NBA.
Oh, yeah, it really has. I mean, you got Embiid, you got Jokic, you've got Chet Holmgren, you've got Victor Wembanyama, you've got, as we mentioned, in Minnesota, you've got their two bigs with Kat and Rudy Gobert. You look down in Houston, Alperen Şengün, who we've mentioned already. It's the same thing for Orlando with Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. Like, you've got these unique big guys that are kind of taking over the NBA. A caller called in yesterday here on 95.7 The Game. You were on the air, Dan. Cooper Flagg. He's not like a 7-footer, but he's like the next coming. He's a big guy with a guard skill set. Like, that's where the NBA is going. And I think the Warriors, honestly, recognize that. That was what the Wiseman pick was.
Oh, that hurt.
Now, they messed up, and I mean, Wiseman clearly was not the player they wanted him to be, but I mean, Wiseman fits that mold. Now, he's maybe not as good of a dribbler, as agile as Chet Holmgren, but that's what they were going for. They were going for that new age big. They just picked the guy who happens to not be very good at basketball.
It set him back. It really set them back because if he was that guy, you're right. Now you've got the balance you've been looking for. You've got a big, and then you've got this talented veteran core. But that's really where the league is at. It's about getting these bigs, but these bigs, unlike back in the day when I was growing up, where you play down on the post, but these bigs that have this remarkable skill set, and they thought they had one with James Wiseman, because I think going forward, Mark, I think that's the template. Whereas before, it's like, you need shooting guards, you need wings, you need to shoot threes, you need guys who can Euro step and cross over. But now I think it's, who's the next Chet Holmgren? Give me a Wembanyama. How do I get Cooper Flagg? Who's the next Giannis? Who's the next Jokic? Who's the next Joel Embiid? That's where the league's going. Whereas just a few short years ago, that's not where you're at. But that's what happens in this league is that, once the word gets out, it changes fundamentally how basketball is being played at the AAU level, at the collegiate level, certainly, at the G League, just all those teams that funnel into the NBA now at a much younger age. Guys at 6'10", 6'11" aren't playing in the paint, aside from Zach Edey, who happens to be my favorite basketball player of all time. Yeah.
Well, I saw that he attempted his first career three-pointer the other night. He missed it. 0 for 1 in his collegiate career from downtown.
Do you think he has we're talking about, for those of you that aren't familiar, with Zach Edey, who is the 7-footer. They call him the Big Maple because he's also from Canada.
Purdue.
And he's with Purdue. He's with the Boilermakers, who were the number one. They were
number one seed last year, and they lost in the first round.
But I think they were the number one ranked team in the NBA or in college basketball, according to the latest rankings. I don't know, but Does this guy have a future in the NBA? I mean, if you were to ask me this question again back when I was a kid, he would have been a lottery pick, if not the number one guy taken. But because he's a 7-footer, if you're not familiar with him, his whole game is in the paint. It's all about putbacks and just bullying people and being bigger and stronger than everyone else. And he doesn't step outside of the lane. That's his kryptonite. But he's a perfect example where there is absolutely, probably very little interest in this guy. I'm just curious if you think he has an NBA career.
He'll probably get drafted because he's one of the best players in college basketball, but no, I don't think he has much.
But where do you play him? Where do you play a big like that?
That's the problem.
Because on the defensive end, he's just going to get – if he can't step out and close on guys, then you can't hide him defensively.
No, the league is too athletic for guys like that now.
Well, it's fascinating because the centers today, you're right, the Cooper Flags of the world and the Chet Holmgrens, and it's interesting because – when you think about the Golden State Warriors, just to bring everything back home, they don't have one of those. They've got Kevon Looney. And even TJD, as good as he might be, is still, when you take on the Chet Holmgrens and the Jokic's of the world and the Embiids, and if it comes down to trying to match up with a big, if you're 6'9", it's just a matter of math. 6'9" against a talented 7-footer, you're going to be at a clear disadvantage.
Yeah. 100%. I agree with you.
It'll be interesting to see how the Warriors work that front court, but I do think that the youngsters do give them some level of promise. I know I don't mean to step on your toes and reiterate what it is you're going to be talking about coming up in a little bit later this afternoon, but just taking a look ahead at this Dallas Maverick team without Luka Doncic, who is clearly, if you think Steph Curry is a one-man show with the Golden State Warriors, well, X that times 5 when you're thinking about the Dallas Mavericks and Jokic. If he's not able to go and Kyrie is not able to go, the Dallas Mavericks do. I know we made this mistake against the Miami Heat, but clear underdogs tonight against the Warriors, I would have to think.
Yeah, looking at the latest NBA injury report, and we'll keep you updated starting at 4:30 when Warriors Live does begin. Kyrie Irving doubtful, Luka Doncic still questionable, Maxi Kleber out. Seth Curry also questionable for the Dallas Mavericks. Meanwhile, for the Warriors, Kevon Looney questionable still with an illness. The only other Warrior on the list is Draymond Green, who's of course still out with that indefinite suspension. If Luka Doncic misses, there is no excuse. The Warriors absolutely need to come away with a win tonight. It is similar to what happened in Miami or versus Miami on Thursday. But if Luka doesn't play, Dan, and the Warriors find a way to mess this one up as well, we're going to be talking about a disaster on this road trip. I mean, 7-game homestand. You started the homestand at 500. I laid out, you go 5-2, you go into the road trip 20-17. And you tricked one away against a Miami team dealing with a number of injuries, and you can't do that tonight. The Warriors desperately need a win.
You mentioned Kevon Looney unavailable, which puts his...
Potentially. He's questionable.
He's questionable, so that puts his consecutive game streak of 223 games online.
It does.
Which goes back to some 3 seasons. So it'll be interesting to see if Kevon Looney does go in. And you're right. If I'm Kevon Looney, I have added incentive with the young man that's breathing right down my neck that if I come out of the starting lineup, I may never sniff it again.
So Kevon misses today. Let's say that. Do you think Trayce Jackson-Davis is the starting 5? Got to be, right?
I think it was imminent regardless. Even if he did play, I think it was just a matter of time before he replaces Kevon Looney.
Yeah.
Which, before we get out of here, you know, when you think about Kevon Looney, who typically would play sort of in the opening moments of the game, and then you wouldn't see him until, you know, maybe in the fourth quarter or in the second half. So if he's not starting, does he ever play again?
I mean, that's a good question. He generally plays like 7 minutes to start each half. And that's like about it. Yeah. Unless on rare occasions where he closes, like he closed the Christmas game against Jokic because there's no Draymond. But really, he plays 7-minute stretches to begin each half, and that's about it. So if he doesn't start, to your point, do you even see him at any point? You probably get him to in the second quarter, and it changes things up. But maybe this is a turning point, and maybe this is where Trayce Jackson-Davis inserts himself, and he never leaves the starting lineup. Who knows?
All right, well, we'll find out all of those questions to be answered tonight, beginning at 4:30 with Warriors Live with Mark Grandy. He'll take you right up until 5 o'clock, and then Tim Roy, of course, will have the call beginning at 5:30 here on 95.7 The Game as the Warriors take on the Dallas Mavericks. For my man Mark Grandy, once again, you can hear him beginning at 4:30 with Warriors Live. This is Dan Devone. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, everybody. So long.
I bet you folks are glad to be done with your shopping. Hopefully, all your gifts went well.